They say an Omega's power is measured by submission, by grace under pressure, by how perfectly she can smile while the world tears her apart. Tonight, Lady Evelina Ashford will prove them all wrong, not with tears, not with surrender, but with the kind of fury that burns kingdoms to ash. This is the story of a woman who walked into her own execution dressed in silk and diamonds, and walked out wearing a crown forged from betrayal itself. Stay until the end to see how one moment of humiliation became the greatest power move in royal history. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments, so I know my tribe is watching. The midwinter royal banquet was designed to break people. Not with violence, not with obvious cruelty, but with the slow, grinding pressure of 500 pairs of eyes watching your every breath, weighing your worth with each movement, calculating your value like merchants appraising livestock at market. Evelina Ashford had learned to survive in this world. 24 years of courtly training had taught her to hold her spine straight even when her ribs ached from the corset, to keep her smile soft even when her jaw locked from tension, to make her scent, that delicate combination of jasmine and morning frost that marked her as Omega, seem like a gift rather than a weakness. Tonight she wore midnight blue silk that moved like water against her skin. The dress had been selected 3 months ago, approved by the Queen Mother herself, tailored to perfection by the royal seamstresses who whispered about how fortunate she was, how blessed, how any Omega in the kingdom would trade their soul to stand where she stood, at the right hand of Crown Prince Lucien Valamont, the future Luna Queen. The orchestra played something elegant and forgettable. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across marble floors polished to mirror shine. Long tables groaned under the weight of roasted game, winter fruits preserved in honey, wine from vineyards that had served the crown for 3 centuries. Diplomats from the northern hold spoke in careful tones with generals from the eastern reaches. Nobles from old bloodlines circled each other like wolves testing territory. Alphas displayed their strength through subtle demonstrations of dominance, a hand placed possessively on a chair back, a stance that took up more space than necessary, a laugh that carried just a fraction too loud. And Omegas moved through it all like ghosts, beautiful, decorative, valuable only for their ability to bind powerful families through mating bonds and produce the next generation of rulers. Evelina had made peace with this reality years ago, or at least she had convinced herself she had. She stood beside Lucien on the raised dais, elevated above the crowd, visible to everyone. His hand rested on her lower back, the picture of devotion for public consumption. She could feel the coldness in his touch, even through layers of silk and steel-boned corset. They had been engaged since her 18th birthday, promised to each other through contracts signed in blood, and witnessed by the kingdom's highest powers. 6 years of careful preparation. 6 years of molding herself into whatever shape the crown required. In 2 weeks, they would complete the mating ceremony. The bond would be permanent, unbreakable, sealed by both law and biology. She would become Luna Queen. He would become king. Together, they would rule. This was what she had been raised for. This was what her family had sacrificed everything to achieve. So why did her chest feel hollow every time she looked at him? Lucien was beautiful in the way that powerful alphas often were, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble by artists who understood symmetry but not warmth. His scent carried notes of cedar and steel, dominant and commanding in a way that made weaker wolves bow instinctively. She had tried to love him. God, she had tried. But somewhere between the political strategy sessions and the public appearances and the carefully scheduled moments of affection designed for maximum visibility, she had realized something terrifying. She was marrying a stranger who looked at her the way a general might assess a useful weapon, with appreciation for function but no recognition of soul. The thought made her throat tight. She pushed it down, buried it beneath layers of training and duty and the simple fact that backing out now would destroy her family, humiliate her house, and mark her as unreliable in a world where an Omega's reputation was more fragile than winter ice. So she smiled. She stood straight. She let Lucien's cold hand rest against her back and told herself this was enough. The king rose from his seat at the center of the high table, and the room fell silent with the kind of immediate obedience that only absolute power commands. King Aldrich Valamont looked older than his years. The crown sat heavy on his gray hair, and his eyes held the exhaustion of a man who had made too many hard choices and no longer remembered which ones were right. But his voice still carried authority when he spoke. This gathering celebrates not only the turning of the year, but the future of our kingdom. In 2 weeks, my son Lucien will complete his mating bond with Lady Evelina Ashford. 2 great houses united, 2 strong bloodlines joined, the promise of stability for generations to come. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Evelina felt Lucien's hand tighten slightly on her back. Not affection, but a reminder to play her role correctly. She inclined her head in graceful acknowledgement, let her smile soften at exactly the right moment, made eye contact with key nobles in the crowd who would spread word of her appropriate behavior. Perfect. Obedient. Exactly what an Omega should be. The king raised his glass. To the future king and his Luna queen. The crowd echoed the toast. Crystal rang against crystal. Wine the color of garnets caught the light. And that was when Evelina smelled it. Faint. Almost hidden beneath the overwhelming mix of scents that filled the great hall. Wine and roasted meat and expensive perfumes and the musk of too many wolves crowded into one space. But unmistakable once she noticed it. Another Omega's scent, clinging to Lucien's ceremonial cloak. Not hers. Her stomach dropped. Ice water flooded her veins. She knew that scent. Delicate magnolia with an undertone of amber. Distinctive enough that even among the dozens of Omegas present tonight, she could identify the source immediately. Lady Seraphine Blackthorn, her closest friend, her confidant since childhood. The one person in this viper's nest of a court she had believed she could trust absolutely. Evelina's hand trembled slightly as she raised her own glass. No one else would notice. She had too much control for that. But she felt the tremor like an earthquake in her bones. She turned her head just enough to look at Lucien. His expression remained perfectly composed, regal, distant. He met her eyes for half a heartbeat, and she saw nothing there. No guilt, no acknowledgement, nothing but the same cold assessment she had learned to expect. Then he looked away. The toast concluded. The crowd returned to their conversations. Music swelled again as the orchestra launched into something livelier, and Evelina stood frozen on the dais, her smile locked in place, while her world quietly cracked apart. Emboîté. She waited an hour, long enough for the formalities to conclude, long enough for attention to shift away from the high table as nobles scattered to pursue their own intrigues and alliances, long enough for Lucien to be pulled into conversation with the Northern Hold ambassadors, his attention fully occupied by matters of border security and trade agreements. No one noticed when she slipped away from the dais. Being forgettable was one of an Omega's most useful survival skills. Evelina had perfected the art of moving through crowds like smoke, present but not demanding attention, visible but not memorable. She knew which servants' corridors connected to which staterooms, knew which guards could be trusted to look the other way, and which ones reported directly to the king's spy master. She had spent 6 years learning this palace's secrets, not because she was naturally cunning, but because survival required knowing where the exits were. The scent trail led her away from the bright noise of the banquet hall into older sections of the palace, stone corridors where torchlight painted shadows on walls that had witnessed 3 centuries of royal intrigue. Her silk skirts whispered against floors worn smooth by generations of footsteps. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Sweat gathered at the small of her back despite the winter cold that seeped through the stone. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe her mind was playing tricks. Maybe the stress of the upcoming ceremony had twisted her perceptions into paranoid fantasies. But Omegas did not imagine scent markers. Their biology was built around reading chemical signals, interpreting emotional states through pheromones, recognizing individual identities through scent the way others might recognize faces. She knew what she had smelled, knew who it belonged to. She just desperately wanted to be wrong. The trail led to the East Wing Tower, a section of the palace reserved for private quarters of high-ranking nobles and royal family members. Evelina's own rooms were in this wing, so were Seraphine's, and so was one of Lucien's private studies. Her feet stopped moving. She stood in the shadowed corridor outside the heavy oak door, close enough that she could hear voices inside, muffled, indistinct, but undeniably there. A woman's laugh, low and intimate, A man's voice responding, too quiet to make out words, but familiar in cadence. Evelina's hand moved to the door handle before her conscious mind gave permission. The metal felt cold against her palm. Her fingers tightened. She could walk away, pretend she had never followed the scent trail, return to the banquet hall and smile and play her role and let whatever was happening behind this door remain hidden. That was what a smart Omega would do, what a political creature would do, what someone who understood the cost of truth would do. But Evelina was tired, bone tired, soul tired, tired of pretending, tired of swallowing her instincts, tired of being the perfect porcelain doll everyone expected. She opened the door. The scene inside would have been almost mundane if it had not destroyed everything she believed about her life. Lucien stood near this window, still wearing his formal attire from the banquet. His ceremonial cloak hung loosely from his shoulders, the same cloak that had carried Seraphine's scent. And Seraphine herself sat on the edge of the study's desk, her emerald green gown pooled around her like liquid silk, her honey blonde hair falling in carefully arranged curls. She looked up when the door opened, and for one frozen moment, her blue eyes met Evelina's brown ones. Then she smiled. Not apologetic, not guilty, just pleased, like a cat who had caught something interesting and wanted to show off the kill. Evelina. Seraphine's voice carried that same musical quality that had charmed half the court. We were just discussing… No. The word came out harder than Evelina intended. She closed the door behind her with careful control, despite the way her hand shook. Her gaze shifted to Lucien. How long? The Crown Prince regarded her with the same distant expression he always wore, as if she were a mildly inconvenient interruption rather than his future mate walking in on… What? What was this? How long? She repeated. Her voice had gone quiet. Dangerous. How long have you been fucking my best friend? Seraphine laughed. Actually laughed. Oh, darling, don't be so dramatic. It's not like that. Then what is it like? The question hung in the air. Lucien moved away from the window with the predatory grace of an alpha who had never questioned his own power. When he spoke, his voice held no emotion whatsoever. This does not concern you. The words hit like a physical blow. Evelina felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart breaking, but something deeper. The final thread of whatever hope she had been clinging to. Does not concern me. She repeated the words slowly, testing them, tasting how absurd they sounded. I am your future mate, your future Luna Queen, and you are… We have an arrangement, Evelina. Lucien's tone suggested he was explaining something obvious to a child. A political arrangement. You fulfill your role. I fulfill mine. What happens between us privately is irrelevant to the function we serve. Privately. She looked at Seraphine, who had started examining her nails with elaborate disinterest. You brought her to your private study, in the palace, during our engagement banquet, while the entire court celebrates our upcoming mating ceremony. Seraphine glanced up. If you had been more attentive to Lucien's needs, perhaps he would not have sought companionship elsewhere. The casual cruelty in those words made something shift inside Evelina. She had known Seraphine since they were children, had shared secrets and dreams and fears with her, had trusted her with pieces of herself she showed no one else. All of it had been a lie. She looked back at Lucien. When? Does it matter? Yes. Her voice had gone deadly quiet. It matters to me. A muscle twitched in his jaw, the only sign of irritation. 3 years. 3 years, the words echoed in her skull. 3 years. Half of their engagement. The entire time she had been planning their future, preparing to become his Luna Queen, molding herself into whatever shape the crown required, he had been with Seraphine. Who else knows? Lucien's expression finally shifted. A hint of annoyance crept through the careful mask. You are making this unnecessarily complicated. Who else knows? Enough people, Seraphine said. She slid off the desk, her movements liquid and graceful. Her scent, that magnolia and amber combination, filled the room. The important ones, anyway. Evelina's mind raced. Important ones. Court members, nobles, people who should have warned her, people who had smiled to her face while knowing, while laughing at her behind closed doors, while watching her play the devoted future mate to a man who… Her stomach twisted. She pressed one hand against the doorframe to steady herself. You are going to announce it, she said. Not a question, a realization. You are going to break the engagement, publicly. Lucian's expression confirmed her guess even before he spoke. After the mating ceremony. After. She almost laughed. After you have secured the political alliance with my family. After you have locked in the trade agreements and military support that came with our engagement. After you have extracted every possible advantage from this arrangement. He inclined his head slightly. I am not a fool, Evelina. Your family's connections are valuable. But you, he paused, choosing his words carefully, you lack the strength required to stand beside a king. Seraphine understands power in ways you never will. Something hot and sharp lanced through Evelina's chest. Not heartbreak, rage. Pure, incandescent rage. She had spent 6 years being what everyone wanted. Graceful, obedient, politically astute enough to be useful but never threatening. She had swallowed her own desires, buried her own dreams, suffocated her own voice, all in service of becoming the perfect Luna Queen. And they thought she was weak. Her hand fell away from the doorframe. She straightened her spine. When she spoke again, her voice carried a new edge. You should have killed me. Lucian's eyebrows rose fractionally. Excuse me? She looked directly at him, holding his gaze with an intensity that made him blink. You should have killed me. Quietly. Made it look like an accident. That would have been the smart political move. She turned to Seraphine. Instead, you humiliated me. You underestimated me. And that was your first mistake. Seraphine's smile faltered. Are you threatening us? Evelina walked toward the door. She could feel both of them watching her, could smell the slight shift in their sense as uncertainty crept in. Good. Let them wonder. Her hand closed on the door handle. She paused, looked back over her shoulder. I spent 6 years learning how to survive in this court. 6 years making connections, learning secrets, understanding exactly how this kingdom's power structures function. She smiled, and it was not a nice smile. You think I am weak because I played the role you expected. That was not weakness. That was strategy. She opened the door and found herself face to face with 3 palace servants who had clearly been rushing down the corridor. They froze when they saw her. Their eyes went wide. One of them held a tray that rattled in his shaking hands. My lady, one of them gasped. We did not know. The doors, they opened. Ice flooded Evelina's veins. No, the ballroom doors, the servant continued, his face pale. Someone activated the main hall viewing enchantment. Everything happening in the private wings is being displayed on the scrying mirrors. The whole court just saw. The world tilted. Evelina grabbed the doorframe again. Behind her, she heard Lucien curse viciously, heard Seraphine's sharp intake of breath. The whole court. 500 nobles, diplomats, generals, foreign dignitaries, all of them watching through the palace's ancient scrying system that allowed the king to monitor multiple rooms at once. A system that was supposed to be disabled during private moments. Someone had turned it on. Someone had made sure that Evelina's discovery of Lucien's betrayal played out in front of everyone who mattered. She started running. Her silk skirts tangled around her legs. Her carefully arranged hair came loose from its pins. She did not care. She had to get to the ballroom, had to see the damage, had to... She burst through the main doors into a wall of silence. 500 people, all of them staring. The huge scrying mirrors on either side of the hall still displayed the scene from Lucian's study, now showing him and Seraphine standing frozen in panic, their guilt painted across their faces in perfect clarity. Then the mirrors went dark, but the damage was done. Evelina stood at the entrance to the ballroom, breathing hard, her perfect composure shattered. Sweat dampened her skin, her hair hung loose around her shoulders. She looked wild, desperate, exactly like what she was, a woman who had just had her private devastation turned into public entertainment. She searched the crowd for any hint of sympathy, found none. Just calculation, judgment, the predatory interest of people who had just witnessed weakness and were already deciding how to exploit it. An Omega publicly humiliated. A future Luna Queen exposed as inadequate. In this world, there was nothing more pathetic. She felt something inside her die. Not hope. She had already lost that in Lucian's study, but the last shred of belief that dignity and grace and playing by the rules would protect her. Then movement in the crowd. Lucian pushed through the doors behind her. Seraphine followed. They had composed themselves during the run back to the ballroom, their masks firmly in place. Lucien addressed the crowd with the commanding presence of a born ruler. He did not look at Evelina. "It seems there has been a misunderstanding," he said, his voice carried across the silent hall. "Lady Evelina has become overwrought due to the stress of the upcoming ceremony. I suggest—" She surprised herself by laughing. The sound echoed in the huge space, harsh and wrong. A misunderstanding? She turned to face him fully, met his eyes, saw the warning there, the command to be silent, to play along, to salvage what could be salvaged. Instead, she spoke louder, clearer. Let her voice carry to every corner of the room. Tell them the truth. Lucien's jaw tightened. "Evelina, do not. Tell them how long you have been sleeping with my best friend. Tell them how you plan to use my family's political connections and then discard me after securing the throne." She swept her gaze across the crowd. "Tell them how many people in this room already knew and said nothing while I planned our wedding." Murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles. Not sympathetic, hungry. Scandal was currency in royal courts, and this was the kind of scandal that shifted power dynamics. The king rose from his seat. His voice cracked like a whip. "Enough!" But Evelina had gone past caring about kings and commands and political consequences. 6 years of careful control had shattered like crystal against stone. She was bleeding out in front of everyone, and she did not care anymore. She looked at Lucien, waited. His expression had gone cold, glacial. When he spoke, his voice held no emotion whatsoever. "Lady Seraphine is better suited to stand beside a king. She understands what is required. You—" He paused, and the contempt in that pause said everything. "You are exactly what you appear to be. An ornament. Decorative. Ultimately disposable." The words landed like hammer blows. Evelina felt each one. Felt the crowd's reaction shift from scandalous interest to something uglier. Agreement. Confirmation of what they had always suspected about her. Just another weak Omega who could not hold her alpha's interest. Seraphine moved to stand beside Lucien. Her hand found his. They looked good together, powerful, united, everything a royal couple should be. And Evelina stood alone, humiliated, discarded, destroyed. She should have walked away, should have fled the ballroom with whatever shreds of dignity remained, should have done what any sensible Omega would do, retreat, regroup, accept defeat. Instead, she started walking toward the center of the room, toward the raised platform where the king's throne sat. Her footsteps echoed on marble. 500 pairs of eyes tracked her movement. "Lady Ashford," the king said, "a warning, this matter is concluded." She kept walking, reached the platform, climbed the 3 steps, turned to face the crowd with the throne at her back, and smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who had nothing left to lose, someone who had spent 6 years being careful and obedient and politically astute and had been destroyed anyway, someone who was done playing by rules that were designed to break her. She raised her voice. "Let it carry to every shadowed corner. You want to know what makes someone unsuited to stand beside a king? It is not weakness. It is not being an Omega." She locked eyes with Lucien across the room. "It is corruption." The murmurs grew louder. The king stood. Guards moved toward the platform. Evelina spoke faster. "For 3 years, Crown Prince Lucien and Lady Seraphine have been manipulating succession laws, framing political rivals, using my family's connections to secure illegal trade agreements while planning to exile me the moment I was no longer useful." "Lies," Seraphine hissed. Evelina reached into the concealed pocket in her dress, a pocket she had sewn herself, in secret, following instincts she had not fully understood until this moment. Drew out a folded sheaf of papers. She held them up. Contracts. Signed documents. Correspondence between Lucien and Northern Hold separatists promising them autonomy in exchange for military support against the king's loyalists. She looked directly at Aldrich. "Your son has been planning a coup. And all of you," she swept her gaze across the assembled nobles, "were so busy laughing at the humiliated Omega that you missed the knife at your own throats." The silence that fell then was different, heavier, dangerous. Because if she was lying, she was committing treason. And if she was telling the truth, the kingdom was already at war with itself. Lucien's expression finally cracked. Rage, pure and undisguised. He started toward the platform. Guards followed. The crowd erupted into chaos as nobles scattered, drew weapons, chose sides in a conflict that had just exploded from bedroom scandal into existential crisis. Evelina stood her ground. She had one more card to play, one more piece of information that would either save her or guarantee her execution. She looked toward the back of the hall, toward the shadows where the kingdom's most dangerous alpha had been watching silently since the banquet began. Commander Kael Draven, the Wolf of the Eastern Reaches. The general who had never lost a battle and never bent the knee to anyone except the king himself. His eyes met hers across the chaos. Gray, cold, calculating. She had gambled everything on a rumor. A whispered piece of information she had overheard months ago and tucked away. A suggestion that Kael had been investigating corruption in the royal family, that he had evidence, that he was waiting for the right moment to act. Please, she thought, please let me be right. Kael moved, flowed through the crowd like smoke, reached the platform in seconds despite the chaos. Guards moved to intercept him. He drew his sword. The hall went silent again. Everyone froze, because Kael Draven with a drawn blade was death incarnate, and no one, not even the crown prince, was stupid enough to challenge him directly. But he did not point the weapon at Evelina. He knelt, placed the sword on the marble at her feet, looked up at her with those cold gray eyes, and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. I will protect her with my life. The crowd erupted, but Evelina barely heard it. She was staring at Kael, at the most feared warrior in the kingdom kneeling before a disgraced Omega, offering protection, offering alliance, offering validation that she was not insane, that the evidence she held was real, that someone believed her. Lucien's voice cut through the noise. Treason! He pointed at both of them. Commander, you overstep your bounds. That woman is making false accusations to salvage her own humiliation. Kael rose to his feet, turned to face the crown prince. His hand stayed near his sword. The accusations are not false. I have been investigating your activities for 8 months at the king's command. His gaze shifted to Aldrich. Your Majesty, the evidence is conclusive. Your son has been selling military intelligence to foreign powers. Lady Ashford's documents are authentic. The king looked old, broken. He sank back into his throne as if his legs would no longer hold him. Evelina's knees went weak. She had been right. God help her, she had been right. And it was not enough to feel vindicated because the cost was catastrophic, watching a father realize his son had betrayed everything. But she could not afford sympathy right now, could not afford anything except survival. Lucien's expression had gone from rage to something more dangerous. Calculation. He was already looking for exits, already planning his next move. Seraphine had abandoned him the moment Kael spoke. She melted back into the crowd, her survival instincts sharper than any loyalty. And Evelina stood on the platform with a warrior at her side and 500 witnesses watching her transform from humiliated Omega into something else entirely. She looked down at the papers in her hands, the evidence that would destroy a prince, the evidence that had saved her life. She had not planned this, had not orchestrated this confrontation, had simply followed her instincts when betrayal carved her open and left her bleeding. But she had survived. The night that was meant to destroy her had become the night she reclaimed her power. Kael's voice, quiet enough that only she could hear. You have a choice now, Lady Ashford. The easy path or the true one. She met his eyes. What is the easy path? Retreat. Let the king handle his son. Return to your family. Disappear from court politics. Live quietly. And the true path? He smiled then. It was a wolf's smile. Dangerous. Fight. Use this moment. Take what is rightfully yours. She looked out at the crowd, at the nobles who had mocked her, at the court that had dismissed her as decorative and disposable, at Lucien, who had thought her weak. The Omega who was supposed to break had become something else entirely. She turned to the king. Your Majesty, I formally request recognition of my standing as Lady Ashford, and I petition for my engagement to Crown Prince Lucien to be dissolved immediately. The crowd held its breath. The king looked at her, at his son, at the evidence in her hands. Then he nodded, granted. The word echoed through the hall like a thunderclap. But Evelina was not done, and I formally request consideration as candidate for Luna Queen under autonomous selection, not through mating bond, through merit and political alliance. The silence that followed was absolute, because what she had just suggested was impossible. Luna Queens were always chosen through mating bonds with the king or crown prince. Always. It was tradition, law, the way things had been done for centuries. An Omega ruling independently was unheard of. Kael's hand found her elbow, steadying her, supporting her. The king stared at her for what felt like an eternity. Then something shifted in his expression, something that might have been respect. "We will discuss this. Privately. Tomorrow." His gaze swept the room. "This banquet is concluded. Everyone out." Guards moved to clear the hall. Nobles scrambled for exits. Lucien was surrounded by the king's personal guard, his face twisted with fury and disbelief. And Evelina remained standing on the platform, breathing hard, covered in sweat, her hair loose, her dress wrinkled, looking nothing like the perfect Omega she had spent 6 years becoming, looking, for the first time in her life, like herself. Kael's voice, quiet. "That was the most dangerous thing I have ever seen anyone do in this court." She surprised herself by laughing. Dangerous or stupid? Both. He paused. Also brilliant. She looked at him. At the warrior who had just bound his fate to hers in front of everyone who mattered. Why? Why help me? His gray eyes held secrets. Because I am tired of watching competent people destroyed by corrupt ones. And because you reminded me tonight that sometimes the bravest thing in the world is refusing to break. The ballroom emptied around them. Guards escorted Lucien away, not yet arrested, but no longer free. The scrying mirrors remained dark. The chandeliers cast long shadows. Evelina felt exhaustion crash over her like a physical wave. Her hands started shaking. The paper slipped from her fingers and scattered across marble. She had survived, but survival was just the beginning. Tomorrow she would have to face the king, face the political consequences, face a court that had just watched her tear down centuries of tradition, face the question of what came next for an Omega who refused to follow any path that had been laid before her. Kael bent to gather the scattered papers. When he straightened, his expression had shifted to something almost gentle. "You need to leave the palace tonight. There will be retaliation, people loyal to Lucien, people who profit from the corruption you just exposed." His hand found her elbow again. "I have a safe house in the merchant district, guarded, secure. You can rest there until morning." She should have questioned him, should have been more cautious, should have, but she was so tired, and he had knelt for her, had validated her truth when everyone else would have let her be destroyed. Sometimes trust was not about certainty. It was about choosing the least dangerous gamble in a world where every option carried risk. She nodded. They walked out of the empty ballroom together, through corridors that had witnessed her humiliation, past servants who stared with wide eyes, into the winter night where snow had started falling in soft, relentless silence. Behind them, the palace burned with scandal and fury and the collapse of carefully constructed lies. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, the possibility of death or disgrace or exile, but also freedom. The freedom of an Omega who had stared into the abyss of her own destruction and decided to drag her enemies down with her instead of drowning alone. Evelina pulled her cloak tighter against the cold, breathed in air that tasted like snow and smoke, and the sharp clarity that came after surviving the unsurvivable. And somewhere in the darkness behind them, watching from a palace window, a figure stood silhouetted against torchlight, too far away to identify clearly, but close enough that Evelina felt eyes on her back like knives. Seraphine's voice, barely a whisper, carried on winter wind. "This is not over." The safe house smelled like old leather and steel polish. Not the decorative kind that filled palace armories for show, but the working kind that came from weapons used so often the scent had soaked into the walls. Evelina stood in the center of the main room while Kael secured the door behind them. 3 deadbolts, a bar across the frame. Then he moved to the windows, checking each lock with the methodical attention of someone who had survived by never trusting anything at face value. She watched him work, noted the efficiency, the complete absence of wasted movement. This was a man who had killed people, probably a lot of people, and right now he was the only thing standing between her and whoever Lucien sent in the night. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt nothing, just a vast emptiness where fear used to live. Shock, probably. her body's way of protecting her mind from processing everything that had happened in the last 3 hours. You should eat. Kael's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. He had moved to a small table where bread and dried meat sat wrapped in cloth. When did you last eat? She tried to remember, failed. The banquet felt like it had happened in another lifetime to a different person. I am not hungry. That was not the question. She looked at him properly then. Really looked. He was taller than Lucien by several inches, built like someone who had spent years turning his body into a weapon. Dark hair pulled back in a style that was functional rather than fashionable. Scars visible on his hands and neck, the kind that came from real combat, not ceremonial duels. And those eyes, gray like winter storms, currently fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He was assessing her, calculating whether she would hold together or shatter. She lifted her chin. I am fine. You are in shock. There is a difference. He pushed a piece of bread toward her across the table. Eat. If you collapse, I have to carry you, and that complicates security. The bluntness startled a sound out of her that might have been a laugh or might have been something more broken. She moved to the table, took the bread. Her hands shook slightly as she tore off a piece. It tasted like sawdust. She forced herself to chew anyway. Kyle watched her for a moment longer, then seemed satisfied she would not immediately fall apart. He moved to a weapons rack on the far wall, began systematically checking each blade. Why did you help me? Her voice came out steadier than she expected. He did not look up from inspecting a wicked-looking knife. I told you, I am tired of watching competent people destroyed by corrupt ones. That is not an answer. That is a philosophy. His mouth curved slightly. Not quite a smile. You want the tactical answer or the personal one? Both. Tactical. You are useful. You have information, political connections. And most importantly, you just made yourself the most dangerous piece on the board by refusing to play the role everyone expected. He set down the knife, picked up another. Personal. I met you 3 years ago at a military ceremony. You probably do not remember. I was receiving commendations for the Eastern Campaign. You were there with Lucien. She searched her memory, found nothing. I do not. No reason you would. I was one of dozens of officers. You spent maybe 30 seconds speaking to me. He finally looked up, met her eyes. You asked about the soldiers under my command, not in the way people usually do, performative concern for appearances. You wanted actual details. Casualty rates, how we handled trauma, whether the Crown was providing adequate support for veterans. The memory surfaced, vague but present. She had been genuinely curious, had spent the previous week reading reports about the Eastern Campaign's human cost. Lucien had told her later she had embarrassed him by being too interested in common soldiers. Kael continued. Most nobles treated me like a useful animal, a weapon they pointed at problems. You treated me like a person who might have thoughts worth hearing. He shrugged. Small thing. But it stuck. That is why you knelt for me? Because I was polite once? No. I knelt for you because you stood on that platform and chose truth over survival. That takes a particular kind of courage, the kind I will follow into hell if necessary. The words settled in her chest. Heavy, significant, creating an obligation she had not asked for but could not refuse. She took another bite of bread, forced it down past the tightness in her throat. What happens now? Kael set down his weapons inspection, moved to sit across from her at the table. Now we plan. The king wants to meet with you tomorrow. That gives us maybe 10 hours to prepare your strategy. Strategy for what? For claiming a throne that has never been held by an Omega operating independently. His gaze sharpened. You do understand what you asked for tonight, what you set in motion. She met his eyes. I understand I have no other options. Going back to my family means admitting defeat. Accepting exile means letting Lucien win. The only path forward is the impossible one. Good. He leaned forward slightly. Then understand this. The moment you walk into that meeting tomorrow, you are declaring war on every tradition this kingdom was built on. Half the nobles will want you dead. The other half will want to use you as a puppet. The king himself may decide you are too dangerous to let live. And you think I can survive that? I think you are more dangerous than any of them realize, including yourself. He paused. But you need to be smart, ruthless, willing to make choices that would have horrified the woman you were 6 hours ago. She thought about that, about the Evelina who had stood on the dais beside Lucien, smiling and perfect and slowly suffocating, about how that version of herself had died somewhere between discovering the betrayal and choosing to burn everything down rather than suffer alone. What kind of choices? Kael's expression went cold, calculating, the kind that involved deciding who lives and who dies, who you can trust and who needs to be removed before they remove you, who you save and who you sacrifice. He held her gaze. You wanted the throne. This is what the throne costs. Evelina set down the bread. Her appetite had vanished entirely. I never wanted the throne. I wanted... She stopped, tried to articulate something she had never fully acknowledged. I wanted to matter, to be more than decorative, to prove that being Omega did not mean being powerless. Then prove it. His voice went soft. Dangerous. Prove it by taking power they said you could never hold, by forcing them to see you not as an Omega who got lucky, but as someone they should have feared from the beginning. The words ignited something in her chest. Not hope. Something darker. Hungrier. The part of her that had stood on that platform and refused to break. The part that had looked at her own destruction and decided to weaponize it instead. She leaned forward, matched his intensity. Tell me what I need to do. They worked through the night. Kael had maps of the palace spread across the table within minutes. Political diagrams showing allegiances and debts and old grudges that could be exploited. First priority, identify your allies. He tapped several names. These nobles have been quietly opposing Lucien's policies. They might see you as a useful alternative. Might? Politics is built on self-interest. You need to make them believe supporting you benefits them more than supporting whoever the king names as replacement heir. He circled another section of names. These are merchants and guild masters your family has connections with. Pressure them. Call in favors. Make it clear their future prosperity depends on your success. She studied the names, saw people she had smiled at in ballrooms, people who had watched her humiliation tonight with calculated interest rather than sympathy. They will want something in return. Everything has a price. Kael's finger moved to a different section of the map. These are military commanders, some loyal to the crown, some loyal to whoever pays best. You need at least 3 of them firmly in your corner before tomorrow's meeting. How do I convince military commanders to back an Omega with no official standing? You do not convince them you are strong. You convince them everyone else is weaker. He looked up. You have evidence of Lucien's treason. Use it. Make it clear that supporting the old power structure means going down with it. Supporting you means being on the winning side of the revolution. Revolution. The word tasted like metal and smoke. Is that what this is? What did you think happened when you asked for autonomous selection? You declared the old rules invalid. That is revolution, whether you call it that or not. She absorbed this, felt the weight of it settling across her shoulders like a physical burden. What about the king? Where does he stand? Kael's expression shifted, became more guarded. Aldrich is dying, not publicly acknowledged yet, but everyone who matters knows. He has maybe a year. 2 if he is lucky. He paused. That is why Lucien got desperate, why he moved faster than he should have. He was trying to secure power before his father's death created instability. And now? Now the king has to choose between his corrupt son and an Omega who just shattered 6 centuries of tradition. Kael met her eyes. He will choose stability. Whoever can hold the kingdom together. Prove to him you are that person. How? Show him you understand power, that you can be ruthless when necessary, that you will not hesitate to destroy anyone who threatens the crown's authority, including people you once cared about. She thought of Seraphine, of the venom in those parting words. This is not over. What about personal vendettas? People who want me dead for emotional reasons rather than political ones? Those are the most dangerous. Kael stood, began pacing. Lucien cannot touch you directly now. Too visible. But Seraphine has nothing to lose and everything to gain by eliminating you. She will hire assassins, probably already has. The casual certainty in his voice made her stomach clench. You sound very sure. I would do the same in her position. He stopped pacing, looked at her. You humiliated her, exposed her. She will not forgive that. And unlike Lucienne, she does not have to worry about political consequences. She is already ruined. So what do? You kill her first. The words hung in the air between them, flat, matter-of-fact, as if he had just suggested she change her dress. Evelina's mouth went dry. I cannot just... Yes, you can. Kale moved closer, sat down across from her again. You can because you have to. Because she will not stop until you are dead. Because mercy toward your enemies is suicide when you are fighting for a crown. She tried to find words, failed. The bread she had eaten sat heavy in her stomach. I have never killed anyone. I have killed hundreds. His voice remained steady. And I will kill her for you if you cannot do it yourself. But understand that every time I eliminate a threat on your behalf, you owe me. You become dependent on my violence instead of developing your own capacity for it. He leaned forward. Queens do not have the luxury of clean hands. She wanted to argue, to say there had to be another way, to insist she could be different, better, prove that you could hold power without becoming monstrous. But somewhere between the platform speech and this moment, she had stepped into a world where those ideals were weaknesses waiting to be exploited. How? Her voice came out barely above a whisper. How would I even... Poison is traditional, easy, relatively clean. He said it like he was discussing weather. Or you arrange an accident. Fire is good. Staged robbery gone wrong. Make it look like collateral damage from the chaos you created tonight. Evelina pressed her hands flat against the table, felt the solid wood beneath her palms. Anchoring, real. Could you... She stopped. Started again. Could you teach me? Not just how to kill, how to think like someone who has to make these choices. Kael studied her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite approval, but close. Yes. But it will change you. Once you cross certain lines, you do not come back from them. The person you become is not the person you were. She thought about the woman who had stood beside Lucien tonight. Perfect. Obedient. Slowly dying inside. Good. I do not want to be who I was. They talked until dawn. Kale walked her through scenarios, tested her reasoning, pushed her to think tactically instead of emotionally. Scenario 1. The king offers you a ceremonial position, advisor to the crown, but no real power. What do? Refuse. Evelina's voice had gotten stronger over the hours. Accept it, and I am admitting I cannot hold actual authority. It sets precedent that Omegas can be symbolic but not functional rulers. Good. Scenario 2. Lucien's supporters offer you a deal. Withdraw your petition and they will guarantee your family's safety and financial security. Refuse. She did not even hesitate this time. Accept that and I am confirming I can be bought. Also, they will kill me anyway once I am no longer useful. Better. Kael leaned back in his chair. Scenario 3. You discover one of your new allies is secretly working against you, but exposing them means losing military support you desperately need. What do? She thought about this longer, felt the weight of the choice. Keep them close. Feed them false information. Use them to mislead enemies while building alternative support networks. Only eliminate them when I have replaced their value. Kael smiled then, a real smile. Not warm exactly, but satisfied. You are learning. I am becoming paranoid. Paranoia is survived instinct in this world. He stood, stretched. The movement made old injuries visible in the way he compensated for stiffness. You should rest. Few hours at least. The meeting is at midday. What about you? I do not sleep much. Old habits. He moved toward the weapons rack again. I will keep watch. She should have argued, should have insisted he needed rest too, but exhaustion had finally caught up with her. The adrenaline that had kept her functional for the last 6 hours was burning away, leaving only bone-deep fatigue. There was a small room off the main space. Sparse. Military functional. A bed that looked like it had never been slept in and probably served more as a backup staging area than actual living space. Evelina sat on the edge of the mattress. Her dress felt wrong, too tight, too formal. The silk that had been perfect for a banquet had become a cage. She stood, reached behind herself to work the laces. Her fingers fumbled, shook. She had spent 6 years having servants dress her, had forgotten how to do basic things for herself. Pathetic. A knock on the doorframe. Kael's voice, carefully neutral. Need help? Pride wanted her to refuse. Practicality won. Yes. He entered, moved behind her without comment. His hands were surprisingly gentle as they worked the complicated lacing. Professional, impersonal. The touch of someone who had probably done this for injured soldiers in field conditions. The dress loosened. She could breathe again. Thank you. He stepped back. There are clothes in the chest. Not fancy, but functional. Help yourself. She turned to look at him, found him already moving toward the door. Kael. He paused. Why are you really doing this? The truth. Not tactics. Not philosophy. He stood silhouetted in the doorway, silent for long enough that she thought he would not answer. Then, because I have spent 15 years watching this kingdom rot from the inside, watching good people destroyed by systems designed to protect the powerful and punish the honest. He looked back at her. And tonight I watched someone refuse to accept that as inevitable. Someone who decided to fight even when fighting was suicide. That is worth protecting, worth following. He left before she could respond. Evelina stood alone in the small room, stripped off the silk dress that had witnessed her destruction, found plain clothes in the chest, linen shirt, wool trousers, sturdy boots meant for someone who actually worked rather than posed. She dressed in clothing that fit like armor instead of decoration, lay down on the hard mattress, and dreamed of fire and blood and the screaming weight of choices that could not be unmade. She woke to the sound of shouting. Evelina bolted upright, disoriented. Sunlight streamed through the single window. Morning, late morning based on the angle. The shouting came from the main room, multiple voices, angry. She grabbed the nearest weapon, a knife from the chest, and moved to the door. Found Kael standing with his back to her, blocking the entrance. 3 men in palace guard uniforms faced him, not hostile yet, but tense. Orders from the king himself, one guard was saying. Lady Ashford is to be escorted to the palace immediately for questioning. Kael's stance radiated controlled violence. She is under my protection. She goes nowhere without my clearance. We have our orders, Commander, and I am giving you new ones. Turn around. Walk back to whoever sent you. Tell them Lady Ashford will arrive at the appointed time with appropriate security, not before. The guards exchanged glances. Uncertain. Kael's reputation preceded him, but they had been given direct commands. Evelina made a decision, stepped forward into view, kept the knife visible at her side but not raised threateningly. The guards noticed her immediately, their eyes widened slightly. She probably looked nothing like the elegant Omega from last night, dressed in plain clothes, hair still loose, no makeup, no performance. Gentlemen, her voice came out steady, cold. I will accompany you to the palace, but on my terms. You will wait outside while I prepare. And Commander Draven accompanies me as my personal security. Non-negotiable. My lady, we were told. I do not care what you were told. She moved to stand beside Kael, matched his aggressive stance as best she could. I am not under arrest. I am not a prisoner. I am a noble of this kingdom responding to a royal summons. You will treat me with appropriate respect, or I will file formal complaints about guard misconduct. The bluff was enormous. She had no actual authority, but she delivered it like she did. The lead guard hesitated, looked at his companions, looked back at her, then nodded. Half an hour. We wait outside. They left. Kael closed the door behind them, turned to her. That was risky. She set down the knife. Her hands were shaking again. That was necessary. Show weakness now and they will treat me like a suspect instead of a peer. You are learning faster than I expected. He moved to the weapons rack, started selecting pieces. Small blade for concealment, another for quick access. You need to be armed. I have never used weapons. You are about to learn. He held out a slim knife in a wrist sheath. This one is simple. Flip the catch. Blade deploys. Aim for soft targets, throat, gut, eyes. Do not try to be fancy. Just survive. She took the weapon. Let him show her how to secure it beneath her sleeve. The weight felt foreign, dangerous, also necessary. They worked quickly. Kale dressed in full formal military attire, armor beneath ceremonial robes, sword openly displayed. The message was clear. This was official protection, not criminal conspiracy. Evelina borrowed a dress from somewhere. Simple, but well made. Blue again. Darker than last night. She pulled her hair back in a severe style, made herself look older, harder. When she looked in the small mirror, she barely recognized herself. Good. Let them see someone different, someone who had survived their attempt to destroy her and come back sharper. Ready? Kyle stood by the door. No, but that has never mattered. They walked out together into cold morning light. The guards formed up around them. Not aggressive, but present. A reminder that she was being summoned, not invited. The route to the palace took them through the merchant district. Early crowds parted as they passed. Whispers followed. People stared. News had spread. Of course it had. The greatest scandal in generations, already becoming legend. She caught fragments of conversation as they walked. Saw it myself on the scrying mirrors. Can you imagine the crown prince with her best friend? They say she has evidence of treason. Omega trying to claim the throne, it is madness. Evelina kept her eyes forward, her spine straight. Let them whisper. Let them speculate. Let them fear what she might do next. The palace loomed ahead. White stone. Banners snapping in winter wind, guards at every entrance. A fortress designed to protect power and project invincibility. She had walked through these gates hundreds of times, always as a visitor, a guest. Someone granted temporary access to spaces where real decisions were made. Today she walked through as something else, someone who had declared war on the institution itself. The guards led them through familiar corridors, but not toward the throne room, toward the king's private chambers. Smaller, more intimate, where actual business happened away from public performance. Kael's hand found her elbow briefly, steadying, reminding her she was not alone. They stopped outside heavy wooden doors. The guards knocked, waited. Enter. The king's voice, tired, old, but still carrying authority. The doors opened. Evelina stepped through with Kael one pace behind her. Found herself facing not just King Aldrich, but a tribunal. 7 people sat in a semicircle, the king at center, his advisors on either side, military commanders, the high chancellor, and her stomach dropped, Seraphine's father, Lord Blackthorn. This was not a private meeting. This was a formal inquiry. Lady Ashford. The king's gaze fixed on her, heavy, weighing. You made serious accusations last night, produced evidence of treasonous conspiracy, and demanded consideration for a position that has never existed in the history of this kingdom. She met his eyes, refused to look away. Yes, Your Majesty. Do you understand the implications of what you have set in motion? Yes, Your Majesty. Do you understand that if your evidence is fabricated, you will be executed for treason yourself? I do. Silence. The 7 pairs of eyes studied her, calculating, deciding if she was dangerous or simply delusional. Lord Blackthorn leaned forward. His voice dripped venom. My daughter says you have been unstable for months, that the pressure of the upcoming ceremony drove you to paranoid delusions, that you fabricated these documents to cover your own inadequacy when the crown prince chose a superior mate. Evelina forced herself to breathe, to think. This was the counterattack. Discredit her sanity, make her look hysterical. She turned to face Blackthorn directly. Your daughter has been sleeping with my betrothed for 3 years while pretending to be my closest friend. She helped him manipulate succession laws and frame political opponents. And when I discovered this, she told me I was making it unnecessarily complicated. Her voice went cold. If questioning that makes me unstable, then perhaps instability is the only sane response to systematic corruption. Blackthorn's face flushed. How dare you? I dare because I have evidence. She pulled the folded documents from her sleeve, laid them on the table between them. Signed contracts. Correspondence with foreign powers. Financial records showing illegal payments. She looked at each council member in turn. Everything can be verified. Cross-reference the dates. Check the signatures against known samples. Investigate the Northern Hold accounts that received the bribes. One of the military commanders reached for the documents, began scanning. His expression shifted, grew darker. These dates align with troop movements I could never explain, he said quietly. Supplies that went missing, intelligence leaks that got my people killed. He looked at the king. Your Majesty, this needs full investigation. The High Chancellor picked up another page, frowned. This handwriting matches documents in the royal archives, signed by the Crown Prince. He set it down. If authentic, this is catastrophic. If, Lord Blackthorn spat, a clever woman with time and resources could forge, then examine them. Evelina's voice cut through his objection. Bring in your best document analysts. Test the ink. Verify every detail. She leaned forward. I welcome scrutiny. Because unlike your daughter and Crown Prince Lucian, I am not afraid of truth. The king raised one hand. Silence fell immediately. Commander Draven. He looked at Kael. You investigated these allegations independently? Yes, Your Majesty. For 8 months. The evidence is conclusive. The Crown Prince has been compromising kingdom security for personal gain. And you chose to reveal this information through, he gestured vaguely, theatrical spectacle rather than proper channels? Kael's expression did not change. Proper channels were compromised. Half your inner council knew about the corruption and chose to ignore it because it benefited them. The only way to force action was to make it impossible to hide. The accusation hung in the air. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. Aldrich studied Kael for a long moment, then turned back to Evelina. And you, what exactly are you asking for? Recognition. Evelina kept her voice steady. Acknowledgement that leadership is not determined by biology, but by capability. Allow me to prove I can hold authority, not through mating bond, but through demonstrated competence. You are Omega. The king said it flatly. Every tradition we have says Omegas rule through partnership, through supporting an alpha who holds primary power. What you suggest violates fundamental law. Then the law is wrong. She said it quietly but firmly. The law was written by people who benefited from limiting half the population's potential. I am asking you to be the king who changes that. And if I refuse, then you confirm what I already suspect, that this kingdom values tradition over merit, stability over justice. And I will know that the corruption goes deeper than one corrupt prince. The threat was barely veiled. Agree to her terms, or she would continue tearing down institutions. Aldrich's eyes narrowed. You would risk civil war for personal ambition? I would risk civil war to prevent the kingdom from being ruled by traitors. She held his gaze. And yes, I am ambitious. I am tired of pretending that is a flaw. Ambitious people get things done. Complacent people watch kingdoms fall. One of the council members laughed. Short, bitter. She has fire, I will give her that. Fire burns. Another council member shook his head. The question is whether we harness it or extinguish it before it destroys everything. Evelina felt the decision hanging in balance, could feel the room calculating, weighing risks, deciding her fate. And then Seraphine's father made his final play. Your Majesty, Lord Blackthorn stood. Whatever the truth about my daughter's relationship with the Crown Prince, the fact remains that Lady Ashford is emotionally compromised, unstable. She should be removed from court entirely for her own protection and the kingdom's security. No. Kael's voice cut through. His hand moved to his sword, not casually. A clear statement. Anyone who tries to remove her answers to me first. The room went rigid with tension. A military commander threatening the king's council was treason of the highest order, but Kael did not blink, did not back down, and Evelina understood what he was doing, forcing the choice. Either the king had to arrest Kael, the kingdom's most effective general, for protecting her, or he had to acknowledge she was under legitimate protection and therefore had standing. The king looked between them, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed. The sound of a man who was too tired for games but recognized when he had been outmaneuvered. Investigation will proceed. All evidence will be verified. The Crown Prince is confined to his quarters pending results. He looked at Evelina. You will remain free but under guard. If the evidence proves authentic, we will discuss your petition. If it proves false, you will be charged accordingly. It was not approval, but it was not execution either. It was a chance. This session is concluded. The king stood with visible effort. All of you, out. The council filed out. Guards moved to escort Evelina. But before she reached the door, Aldrich's voice stopped her. Lady Ashford. She turned back. He looked old, tired, dying, but his eyes still held sharpness. You are either the bravest woman I have ever met or the most foolish. I have not decided which. Neither have I, Your Majesty. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. Either way, you have certainly made things interesting. He waved dismissal. Go, survive the next few days, then we will see if you deserve what you're asking for. She bowed, turned, walked out with Kael beside her. The corridors felt different now, like she was walking through a place that might become home or might become her execution ground. No way to know which yet. Outside the king's chambers, the guards formed up around them again. But this time the energy felt different, less hostile, more uncertain. They had witnessed her stand before the kingdom's highest powers and refuse to break. That earned something, if not respect, at least caution. The walk back through the palace took them past the east wing, past the corridor where she had discovered Lucian's betrayal. The door to his study stood sealed now, guards posted. And standing in the shadows nearby, watching with eyes that promised murder, was Seraphine, their gazes locked. Neither spoke. Neither had to. The message was clear in the hatred carved across Seraphine's beautiful face. This was not over, not even close. One of them would not survive what came next. Evelina kept walking. Let Seraphine see that she was not afraid, even if that was a lie, even if terror lived in her bones now, even if every step took her deeper into a war she might not know how to win. She had crossed the line between victim and combatant. There was no path back, only forward into whatever blood and fire waited ahead. And somewhere in the palace above, in rooms where power lived and kings died slowly, decisions were being made that would reshape the kingdom or tear it apart. The revolution had begun. Not with armies or manifestos, but with one Omega who refused to accept that her destruction was inevitable, who looked at the machinery designed to break her and decided to break it first. Whatever came next would be written in choices that could not be unmade and blood that could not be washed away. The only question remaining was whose blood would soak the throne room floor when this was finished. The guards escorted them back to the safe house in silence. Different guards this time. Younger, less certain how to handle an Omega who had just threatened the kingdom's power structure and walked out alive. Evelina counted their steps, watched their movements, noted which ones kept hands near weapons and which ones seemed more interested in looking anywhere except at her. Fear was useful. Fear meant they saw her as something other than prey. Kael dismissed them at the door with curt efficiency, waited until they disappeared around the corner before securing the entrance. 3 deadbolts again, bar across the frame. Then he moved through the space, checking every corner with the systematic paranoia of someone who had survived too many assassination attempts to trust empty rooms. You did well. His voice carried no particular emotion. The king could have had you arrested. He chose investigation instead. That buys time. Time for what? Evelina moved to the table. Her legs felt unsteady. Adrenaline crash hitting hard now that immediate danger had passed. Time to consolidate support. Turn potential allies into committed ones. Time to prepare for whatever the investigation uncovers. He paused. Time to eliminate Seraphine before she eliminates you. The casual return to murder as solution made Evelina's stomach twist. But she did not argue. Could not argue. Because Seraphine's expression in that corridor had been clear enough. One of them would not survive this. How long before the king's investigators verify the evidence? She kept her voice steady through sheer will. 3 days. Maybe 4 if they are thorough. Kael began laying out maps again. Same routine as before. Planning, strategizing, turning chaos into manageable problems with solutions written in blood and political maneuvering, which means we have 72 hours to secure military backing and neutralize immediate threats. Neutralize. Such a clean word for what they were discussing. Evelina stared at the maps, at names of people she had smiled at in ballrooms, people who had watched her humiliation and calculated how to profit from it, people who would support her or destroy her based entirely on which choice served their interests better. This was the world she had asked to enter, not as decoration but as player, not as symbol but as power. The cost of that choice was becoming clearer with each passing hour. A knock on the door shattered the planning session, Sharp, urgent, wrong rhythm for guards doing routine checks. Kael's hand went to his sword immediately. He moved to the door with predatory silence. Checked the viewing slot. His expression shifted. Not alarm exactly, but surprise. He opened the door. Lady Margot Theron walked in like she owned every space she entered. One of the king's senior advisors, the woman who controlled half the kingdom's intelligence networks and made careers disappear with a word. Silver hair pulled back severely. Eyes that had witnessed 3 kings rise and fall and survived all of them. She looked at Evelina with the clinical assessment of someone evaluating livestock at market. Lady Ashford, you have created quite the mess. Evelina forced her spine straight, refused to show how much Margot's presence unnerved her. Lady Theron, to what do I owe the honor? Margot moved to the table, picked up one of Kael's maps, studied it with casual interest that suggested she already knew everything written there. I am here because the king sent me, unofficially, to determine whether you are a revolutionary worth supporting or simply a desperate woman making noise before inevitable execution. The bluntness was like a slap. Evelina absorbed it, pushed past the instinct to defend herself. And what have you determined? That you are either brilliantly strategic or suicidally reckless. Margot set down the map. Possibly both. She looked at Kael. Commander, leave us. Kael did not move. I do not take orders from... You do now. Margot's voice went cold. Because I outrank you in ways that matter. And what I need to discuss with Lady Ashford concerns matters you are not cleared for. She smiled. It was not a kind smile. Unless you want to be removed from your command and stationed at the northern border counting supply wagons for the rest of your career, I suggest you take a walk. Evelina caught Kael's eye, gave the smallest nod. He hesitated, then turned and left without another word. The door closed. Silence settled heavy between them. Margot pulled out a chair, sat like she was settling in for a long conversation. Now then, let us discuss what you actually want versus what you are pretending to want. I want autonomous recognition as no. Margot cut through the rehearsed answer. That is what you asked for publicly. What do you want when you are alone at night and the performance ends? The question hit harder than expected. Evelina found herself without prepared response, because the answer had changed since last night. Changed somewhere between discovering betrayal and standing on that platform and realizing there was no going back to any version of her previous life. I want to prove I am not powerless. The words came out raw, unpolished, real. I want everyone who dismissed me to know they were wrong. I want... She stopped, tried to articulate something she had never said aloud. I want to matter in ways that cannot be erased. Better. Margot leaned back slightly. Honest ambition is rare. Most people dress it up in noble language about service and duty. You at least have the spine to admit you want power for its own sake. Is that what you think this is? Power for its own sake. Is it not? The older woman's gaze stayed level. You were humiliated. You struck back. Now you are trying to convert personal vendetta into political revolution. Nothing wrong with that. Some of history's greatest leaders started from similar motivations, but do not pretend this is about justice or reform. This is about you refusing to accept defeat. Maybe those things are not mutually exclusive. Evelina met her eyes. Maybe personal survival and systemic change can both be true motivations. Perhaps. Margot pulled a sealed envelope from inside her coat, which is why the king sent me. He needs to know if you understand what you are actually demanding, if you comprehend the full weight of what autonomous rule means. Tell me. It means no one to hide behind when decisions go wrong, no alpha to blame for policy failures, no partnership to distribute responsibility. She leaned forward. It means when people die from your choices, and they will die, you carry that alone. When the kingdom suffers, you suffer. When you make the wrong call, there is no one else to absorb the consequences. I understand. Do you? Margot's voice went sharp. Because I have watched dozens of ambitious people claim they wanted power. Most discovered too late that power is not victory. It is endless weight, constant threat, the slow erosion of every soft part of yourself until all that remains is the machinery of survival. Then why do it? Why does anyone? Because the alternative is irrelevance. Margot said it like confession, because mattering, even in monstrous ways, is better than being forgotten. She pushed the envelope across the table. The king wants you to read this, then decide if you truly want what you are asking for. Evelina picked up the envelope. Heavy paper, sealed with royal wax. Her fingers trembled slightly as she broke the seal. Inside was a single page, handwritten, the king's script unmistakable. She read, and felt the ground shift beneath her. The letter detailed everything, the full extent of Lucien's conspiracy, names of every noble involved, military officers who had been bribed, trade agreements that had been compromised, foreign powers who now had leverage over the kingdom's internal politics. But that was not the devastating part. The devastating part was the final paragraph. Aldrich knew, had known for months, had been gathering evidence through Kael and others while letting the corruption continue because stopping it prematurely would have fractured the kingdom into civil war. He had used Evelina's humiliation as catalyst, had allowed her to be destroyed publicly because it created the opening needed to expose everything without appearing like the king was turning on his own son preemptively. She had been a tool, a useful crisis that forced everyone's hand. And now Aldrich was offering her the thing she had demanded, autonomous consideration for leadership, because it solved multiple problems simultaneously. It punished Lucien. It distracted from the king's own complicity. It gave the kingdom something dramatic and unprecedented to focus on, while deeper investigations proceeded quietly. She was still being used, just by different players with more sophisticated strategies. Evelina set down the letter. Her hands had gone numb. You knew. You were part of this. Margot's expression did not change. I advised the king. Part of that means helping him navigate impossible situations where every choice costs lives. Yes, I knew. I recommended using your situation as trigger mechanism. You let me be humiliated. Evelina's voice had gone flat, watched me suffer and did nothing because it was politically convenient. I watched you transform personal catastrophe into revolution. Margot leaned forward. That was never guaranteed. You could have broken, could have fled, could have accepted exile and disappeared. The fact that you did not, that you stood on that platform and chose war instead of retreat, that was all you. The words should have felt like validation. Instead, they felt like being shown the puppet strings that had controlled her the whole time. So what now? Evelina met Margot's eyes. I get my throne. You get your distraction. Everyone wins except the parts of me that die, becoming whatever creature this kingdom needs. Now you decide if the cost is acceptable. Margot stood. The king genuinely does not know which choice you will make. He thinks you might refuse, walk away, choose survival over legacy. And what do you think? I think you are already too far in to turn back. That you crossed the point of no return when you opened that study door and followed the scent of betrayal instead of ignoring it. She moved toward the door. I think you will accept, because the alternative is admitting the last 48 hours of suffering meant nothing, that you destroyed yourself for no purpose. That is not a choice. That is a trap. Welcome to power. Margot opened the door, stopped, looked back. One more thing. The investigation will find the evidence authentic. Lucien will be formally charged within 72 hours, which means Seraphine's father loses all political protection. She paused. Whatever you plan to do about the girl, do it in the next 3 days. After that, too many eyes will be watching. You are telling me to commit murder. I am telling you to eliminate a threat before that threat eliminates you. What you call it is semantics. Margot stepped through the door. The king expects your answer by tomorrow evening. Choose wisely, or do not choose at all. Either way, the kingdom moves forward. She left. The door closed. Silence crashed back in. Evelina sat alone with the letter and the knowledge that nothing she had done was truly her own choice, that she had been moved across a board by players so skilled she had not even seen the game being played. The revolution she thought she was starting had been orchestrated by people who had been manipulating kingdoms since before she was born, and the throne she was fighting for came with strings attached that would turn her into exactly what they needed her to be. She should have felt betrayed, furious, destroyed. Instead, she felt something colder, harder. The final death of whatever naive hope had still lived in her chest. If she was going to be used, she would at least extract maximum value from the transaction. The door opened. Kael walked back in, took one look at her face and knew something had shifted. What happened? She told him. Everything. Watched his expression darken as the full scope of manipulation became clear. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then, "You're going to accept anyway." "Yes." "Why?" "Because refusing means they win completely. Accepting means I at least get power out of being their weapon." She stood, met his eyes. "And because once I have that power, I can start dismantling the systems that made this possible in the first place. That will take decades, if it is even possible. Then I have work to do." Her voice had gone cold, clinical, the tone of someone who had just accepted what they had to become. Starting with Seraphine, Kael studied her, looking for something. Hesitation maybe, doubt, signs she was not ready. He found none. "Tonight then." His voice matched hers, cold, professional. "I know where she goes after dark. Private salon in the merchant quarter where nobles pretend they are not being watched. Easy to stage an accident. Not an accident." Evelina heard herself say the words like they came from someone else. "I want her to know it was me. I want her to understand exactly what she created when she decided I was too weak to fight back." Kael's expression shifted, something that might have been approval or might have been concern. "That is vengeful." "Good." She smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Let vengeance be the first lesson I teach this kingdom, that underestimating me is a fatal mistake." They planned through the afternoon. Kael walked her through options, methods, contingencies. His voice never wavered, never suggested this was anything other than tactical necessity. Poison remained easiest, quick, relatively clean. Could be delivered through wine or food, would look like natural causes if dosed correctly. But Evelina kept returning to the same conclusion. Easy was not the point was message, statement, proof that she had transformed into something dangerous. Blade, then, personal, intimate, impossible to mistake for anything except intentional violence. Kael did not argue, just taught her technique, how to hold the knife, where to strike, how to brace for resistance when steel met flesh. His instructions were clinical, detached, the voice of someone who had done this enough times that murder was simply another skill to master. Evelina listened, practiced movements until muscle memory started forming, felt her body learning violence the way it had once learned dance steps and courtly graces. This was the cost. This was what power demanded, the willingness to destroy without hesitation when destruction served purpose. The woman who had stood beside Lucienne would have been horrified, would have refused, would have clung to belief that there were lines you did not cross no matter what. That woman was dead, had died on that platform, had been killed by betrayal and humiliation and the realization that playing by civilized rules only worked when everyone else followed them too. What remained was something sharper, colder, capable of cutting without remorse. Darkness fell. They dressed in plain clothes. Nothing that would draw attention. Kael led her through streets she barely recognized. The merchant quarter after nightfall belonged to different rhythms, drinking houses, gambling dens, places where nobles came to pretend they were dangerous instead of just wealthy. The salon Seraphine frequented sat above a wine shop, private entrance around back, guards that could be bribed or distracted depending on approach. Kael handled the guards. Evelina did not ask how, did not want to know. Just followed him up narrow stairs into a corridor thick with expensive incense and the muffled sound of conversation from behind closed doors. Third room on the left. Kael's voice stayed quiet. She arrived 20 minutes ago. Alone. He met her eyes. Last chance to change your mind. Evelina touched the knife secured beneath her sleeve, felt its weight, its purpose. No, this ends tonight. He nodded, stepped back, gave her space to move. She walked to the third door, listened, heard Seraphine's voice inside, laughing about something, casual, confident, completely unaware. Evelina opened the door. Seraphine sat at a small table with wine and cards spread before her, alone. Whatever company she had been expecting had not yet arrived. She looked up when the door opened, Her expression went from annoyed at interruption to shocked recognition in half a heartbeat. Evelina, what are you... How long did you plan it? Evelina closed the door behind her, kept her voice conversational. How long were you working with Lucien before you decided seducing him would give you leverage? Seraphine stood. Her hand moved toward something hidden in her dress. You should not be here. Answer the question. Evelina stayed by the door, blocking exit. How long? Does it matter? Seraphine's initial shock had transformed into something uglier. You were always going to lose. You were too soft, too focused on being good instead of being effective. The moment Lucien chose me over you, your fate was sealed. So you admit it. The conspiracy, the manipulation, all of it. Of course I admit it. Seraphine pulled a small knife from her bodice. Nothing fancy, just functional steel. You cannot touch me. My father still has protection. You have nothing except a barbarian general and delusions that the kingdom will accept an Omega ruling independently. Your father loses his protection in 3 days when Lucien is formally charged. Evelina felt calm settle over her, the kind of calm that came from knowing exactly what happened next. Which means you have no leverage, no safety net, just whatever damage you can do before someone stops you. Seraphine's grip tightened on her knife. Then I should kill you now. Solve the problem permanently. You could try. Evelina let her own blade slide into her palm. The movement Kael had taught her, smooth, practiced. But you hesitated, because you are not sure you can win. Not sure I am the same person you betrayed. I know exactly what you are. Seraphine started circling, still weak, still pretending strength you do not possess. You think one dramatic speech changes anything? You think the kingdom will follow someone who... Evelina moved, faster than thought, training overriding terror. The blade flashed forward, aimed at Seraphine's throat exactly like Kael had demonstrated. But Seraphine was faster, combat-trained in ways Evelina had not anticipated. She twisted away. Her own knife came up in a practiced counter. Steel rang against steel, the sound impossibly loud in the small room. They separated, both breathing hard now. Seraphine smiled. There it is. The desperation. The realization you are outmatched. You should have stayed broken. Should have... Evelina lunged again, this time lower. Aimed for the gut like Kael had said. Soft targets, quick strikes. Seraphine blocked but barely. The impact sent her stumbling back into the table. Cards scattered, wine spilled. And in that moment of imbalance, Evelina saw the opening, saw where the blade needed to go. But her hand would not move. Froze with the knife raised. Some part of her still human, still civilized, still clinging to belief that there had to be another way. Seraphine saw the hesitation. Her expression shifted to triumph. Knew she had won. She kicked out, caught Evelina in the stomach, sent her crashing backward into the wall. The knife fell from her grip, clattered, across floor. Seraphine was on her immediately, blade pressed against her throat, close enough that Evelina could feel her breath, could see the hatred carved into features that had once smiled with false friendship. You lose. Seraphine's voice dripped venom. Just like I always knew you would. Too weak. Too... The door burst open. Kael filled the frame, took in the scene instantly. His sword cleared its sheath in one fluid motion. Seraphine tried to turn. Tried to keep the blade at Evelina's throat while facing the new threat. She was not fast enough. Kael's blade took her through the chest. Quick, efficient, utterly final. Seraphine's eyes went wide with shock. Her knife fell away. She looked down at the steel protruding from her ribs like she could not quite process what had happened. Then Kael pulled the blade free, and she crumpled. Blood spread across expensive carpet. Her breathing went shallow. Wet. Dying but not dead yet. Evelina stood frozen against the wall, staring, unable to process. This was supposed to be her kill, her choice, her transformation into whatever creature the throne required. Instead, Kael had done it for her, had stepped in and solved the problem when she failed. Which meant she owed him. Meant she was dependent on his violence instead of developing her own capacity for it. Exactly what he had warned against. Kael cleaned his blade, sheathed it, looked at Evelina with an expression she could not read. We need to leave. Now. But Evelina could not move, could not stop staring at Seraphine's dying face, at the friend who had become enemy, at the woman whose last expression showed not regret or fear, but baffled fury that her story ended this way. She should have felt relief, victory, justice. Instead, she felt hollow, like something essential had been carved out and nothing had filled the space left behind. Kael's hand found her shoulder, hard enough to break through shock. "We leave now, or we both hang for murder. Your choice." The words penetrated. Evelina forced her legs to work. Let Kael guide her toward the door, away from the body, away from the blood, away from the moment where she had proven exactly what everyone feared, that she was not ready for what power demanded. They moved through corridors, downstairs, into streets where darkness hid their passage. Kael set a brutal pace, did not stop until they reached the safe house. Only when the door was locked behind them did he finally speak. "You froze." It was not accusation, just statement, observation of fact. "I could not." Evelina's voice cracked. "I thought I could, but when the moment came, I could not." "You are not a killer." Kael's tone stayed level. "Not yet. That takes practice. Conditioning. Most people freeze the first time they truly face it. Then I failed." She felt tears threatening, pushed them back through sheer will. "I failed the test, and now you have leverage over me because I needed you to—" "Stop." His hand caught her chin, forced her to meet his eyes. "You did not fail. You discovered a limitation. There is a difference." He paused. "And I do not want leverage over you. I want you functional, capable, able to survive what comes next. By doing your killing for you? By learning from what happened and making different choices next time." He released her, stepped back. "You wanted to prove you could be ruthless. You discovered you are not there yet. So we train, we condition, we transform you into someone who does not hesitate. And if I cannot be transformed, if that part of me is already too damaged to repair, then we find other ways." Kael moved to the weapons rack, started methodically checking each blade again. The same ritual as always. Power does not require you to personally execute every threat. It requires you to be willing to authorize execution and accept the consequences. You can do that without holding the knife yourself. That feels like cowardice. It is pragmatism. Queens do not have to be warriors. They have to be willing to command warriors. He looked back at her. "You hesitated because part of you still sees murder as exceptional, as line crossing. Once you accept that violence is simply another tool, no more significant than negotiation or legislation, the hesitation stops. You make it sound easy. It is not easy. It is necessary." His voice went softer, gentler than she had heard before. "And for what it is worth, I am glad you hesitated. Glad you have not become completely monstrous yet. That humanity might be what saves you when this is over, or it might be what gets me killed. Perhaps." He turned back to his weapons. "But I would rather protect someone who struggles with necessary evil than someone who embraces it too easily." The words settled between them, creating something that might have been intimacy, except neither of them had time or space for that complication. Evelina sank into a chair. Exhaustion crashed through her again. The third time in 2 days, her body protesting the sustained crisis. "What happens now?" Her voice barely above whisper. "Now we wait. The investigation concludes. The king makes his decision, and you either ascend or die." Kael's tone made it clear those were the only options. No middle ground, no graceful exit. "And Seraphine will be found tomorrow. Her father will demand investigation. We have alibis, witnesses who will swear we were elsewhere. It will be ruled unfortunate violence, merchant quarter danger, wrong place, wrong time. You have done this before. Too many times." He said it like confession, like burden. This kingdom runs on violence carefully hidden beneath courtly manners. "I have been the hidden violence for 15 years. Does it get easier?" "No. It gets familiar. There is a difference." Silence fell. Not comfortable, but not hostile either. The shared understanding of people who had both crossed lines and discovered the cost was higher than expected. Evelina closed her eyes. Let herself drift. Not quite sleep, but not quite consciousness either. Somewhere between where the weight eased slightly and breathing did not hurt quite so much. When she opened her eyes again, pale light filtered through the window. Dawn. Another night survived. Kael sat at the table, had not moved, had not slept, just maintained vigil while she recovered. "How long until we know the king's decision?" Her voice came out rough. Margot said tomorrow evening. He glanced at the window, which means we have roughly 36 hours to secure whatever final support we can, to prepare for acceptance or prepare for exile. And if he chooses exile, then we run. I have contingencies, places the crown cannot easily reach. We survive. You rebuild under different name, different identity. That sounds like death anyway, just slower. It is survival. Sometimes that is all we get. She stood, moved to the window, looked out at a city waking to news of another scandal, another death, another crack in the foundations of power. Somewhere in the palace, Aldrich was making calculations, weighing whether supporting her radical petition served his interests better than eliminating the threat she represented. Somewhere in the nobles' quarters, factions were forming, choosing sides, deciding whether the future belonged to tradition or revolution. And somewhere in the streets below, common people were starting to whisper about the Omega who had stood before power and refused to break. Stories had power. Myths had momentum. Even if the reality was messier and uglier and far more compromised than the legend suggested, Evelina had asked for autonomous consideration as ruler, had demanded the throne recognize her capability independent of mating bond or traditional partnership. What she had not anticipated was that getting what she asked for would require becoming someone unrecognizable, would demand sacrifices that carved away everything soft and human until only the machinery of power remained. She touched the glass, cold beneath her fingers, solid, real. 24 hours ago, she had been engaged to a crown prince, had been preparing for a mating ceremony that would have locked her into servitude dressed as partnership. Now she was a killer, or close enough, a revolutionary who had not meant to start revolution, a weapon being wielded by players so skilled she had only started seeing the game in the last day. And the throne she reached for came wrapped in compromises and blood, and the certain knowledge that she would never again be the woman who had walked into that study following a scent of betrayal. That woman was dead, murdered by her own hand somewhere between the platform speech and accepting that survival required transformation. What remained was still forming, still hardening, still learning how to be the monster the crown required while clinging to whatever fragments of humanity might prove useful later. If there was a later, if Aldrich chose support instead of elimination, if the kingdom bent instead of breaking, if she survived the next 36 hours, too many variables, too many ways this ended in execution or exile or quiet assassination that would be explained away as tragic accident. But she had come too far to turn back now, had burned too many bridges, destroyed too many relationships, crossed too many lines. The only direction left was forward into whatever blood and fire waited ahead. And if that path ended in a throne, she would wear it like armor, would rule with the ruthlessness of someone who had learned power's true price. And if it ended in death, at least she would die as herself, not as decoration, not as symbol, but as someone who had mattered, even if only for a moment, even if only as warning to the next Omega who thought she could change everything. The sun rose higher, light spilled across the city, a new day beginning whether anyone was ready for it or not. Kael stood beside her at the window, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You're thinking too much. Just trying to prepare for every outcome. You cannot. There are too many variables, too many players. All you can do is commit to the path and adapt as it unfolds." He glanced at her. That is what command means. Making choices with incomplete information and accepting the consequences, even when the consequences cost lives? Especially then. That is what separates leaders from followers. The willingness to carry weight that would crush most people. She absorbed this. Let it settle beside all the other harsh truths she was learning, and if I break under the weight, then I catch you. His voice went quiet. That is what protection means, not preventing all harm, but ensuring you survive the necessary harm intact enough to keep fighting. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why invest this much in someone who might fail, who might collapse, who might not be worth the cost? Kael was silent for a long moment. Then, "Because you remind me why I started fighting in the first place, before it became routine, before violence was just another task. You still have enough humanity left to hesitate, enough conscience to question, That makes you worth protecting, or it makes me liability. Perhaps both are true. He turned away from the window, started preparing weapons for whatever came next. But I've spent 15 years protecting people who felt nothing, who ordered death like they were ordering wine. I would rather protect someone who struggles with necessary evil than someone who embraces it too easily. The words echoed what he had said before, creating pattern, establishing his values even as he taught her how to compromise hers. Evelina understood then what was happening. Kyle was not just protecting her. He was trying to preserve something in her that he had lost in himself, some fragment of humanity that had been crushed out of him by decades of service to power. She was his redemption arc as much as he was her survival mechanism. The realization should have felt manipulative. Instead, it felt like solidarity. Two people using each other to survive impossible circumstances while pretending it was strategy instead of desperate mutual need. She could work with that, could accept being weapon and symbol and hope all at once if it meant surviving long enough to actually claim the power she had demanded. 36 hours. Then the king's decision, then whatever came after. Evelina moved away from the window, started mentally preparing for the next phase, the final push before judgment fell. Whatever happened next would be written in choices already made and blood already spilled. The only question was whether she survived long enough to see how the story ended, and whether the woman who sat on that throne, if she reached it at all, would still recognize the reflection looking back from the mirror. The messenger arrived at dawn on the second day, young, terrified, wearing the king's colors but moving like someone who expected assassination at any moment. Kyle took the sealed letter before the boy could finish his formal greeting, broke the wax, read silently while the messenger stood frozen in the doorway. Evelina watched Kyle's expression for any tell, found nothing. His face remained carved stone, unreadable, which meant either the news was catastrophically bad or so complex that even he needed time to process. What does it say? Kyle handed her the letter without comment. Her eyes scanned the formal script, once, twice, a third time because surely she was misreading. Surely the king had not just... He accepted. The words barely made it past her throat. He accepted the petition. The messenger cleared his throat nervously. His Majesty requests Lady Ashford's presence at the throne room this evening. Sunset. Full court assembly. He swallowed hard. The ceremony will be conducted before witnesses. Official recognition of autonomous candidacy for leadership position. Not Luna Queen. Evelina noted the careful language. Leadership position, leaving the exact title ambiguous, giving himself room to define parameters later. Clever, dangerous, and exactly what she should have expected from a man who had been playing political games since before she was born. Kael dismissed the messenger with curt efficiency, waited until the door closed, then turned to her with an expression she had never seen before, something almost like concern. This is a trap, obviously. She set down the letter. Her hands were steady now, past the initial shock into cold calculation. The question is what kind of trap and whether we can survive it. He wants you visible, vulnerable, standing before the entire court while making formal declaration. Hale moved to the window, checked the street below for surveillance. That creates dozens of opportunities for assassination. Poisoned wine at the ceremony, archer in the shadows, blade in the crowd. Then we prepare for all of those. She moved to the table, started mentally cataloging what needed to happen in the next 12 hours. What weapons can I carry without being obvious? What routes through the palace minimize exposure? Who in that court can be trusted even slightly? No one can be trusted. He said it flatly. Everyone there will be calculating whether your death serves them better than your survival. He turned back to face her. We should refuse, demand different terms, private meeting, smaller audience, something controllable. If I refuse, I look weak, afraid. Exactly what they expect from an Omega who got lucky once but cannot sustain pressure. She met his eyes. This is the test. Stand before power and prove I belong there, or prove I was always just desperate noise waiting to be silenced. Proving something is worthless if you are dead. Then make sure I am not dead. Her voice went cold. You said you would protect me, that you could keep me functional through necessary harm. This is necessary harm, so do your job. The words came out harsher than intended, sharper, the stress and fear transmuting into anger because anger was easier to hold than terror. Kael absorbed the verbal slap without reaction, then nodded once. Understood. We prepare for war disguised as ceremony. He moved to the weapons rack, started selecting pieces with the methodical care of someone who had done this too many times. You will be armed, multiple backup blades, poison antidotes, in case someone gets past my screening. And you will not drink or eat anything that has not been tested first. What about you? If someone targets you to get to me, I have survived 15 years of assassination attempts. His voice carried grim humor. I am harder to kill than I look. He held out a slim blade. This one goes in your left sleeve. Quick release. Aim for throat or eyes. Do not hesitate. She took the weapon. Let him show her the mechanism again. Practiced the motion until it felt less foreign, less like something that belonged to a different person's life. Except this was her life now. Had been since the moment she walked through that study door. Since the moment she chose exposure over quiet suffering. The woman who had feared violence was gone. What remained was someone learning to wield it. Someone discovering that survival required becoming the thing you feared most. They spent the day in brutal preparation. Kael drilled her on defensive movements, where to stand in a room to minimize blind spots, how to read body language for hostile intent, how to position herself so any attack had to go through him first. By midday, her muscles screamed protest, sweat soaked through her clothes, but the movement started feeling less alien, more instinctive, the body learning what the mind still rejected. This is what warriors felt like, this constant readiness, this assumption that violence lived in every shadow and relaxation meant death. She understood now why Kael moved the way he did, why he checked every corner, why sleep was something he rationed rather than indulged. When you lived this way long enough, peace became more terrifying than combat, because peace meant lowering defenses, and lowering defenses meant dying. Late afternoon brought another visitor, Lady Margot again, this time without pretense of casual social call. She walked in like she owned the space and fixed Evelina with that clinical assessment that stripped away all performance. You received the summons. Yes. And you are foolish enough to accept. I'm committed enough to see this through. Evelina refused to let the older woman's disdain land. What do you actually want, Lady Theron? To make sure you understand what happens tonight. Margot settled into a chair without being invited. The ceremony is real. The king genuinely intends to grant provisional recognition of your autonomous candidacy, but the moment he does, every faction in that throne room becomes your enemy. I assumed as much. Did you assume that Lucian's supporters have been gathering all day? That they plan to use the ceremony as catalyst for open rebellion? That the king is essentially using you as bait to draw them into declaring themselves? Margot leaned forward. You are not being elevated. You are being used as test to see who breaks faith with the crown. And if that test requires your death to be conclusive, Aldrich will allow it. The words hit like physical blows. But Evelina had already suspected something similar, had felt it in the way Margot delivered the first letter, in the timing, in the public nature of the ceremony. She was not being rewarded. She was being deployed as weapon against the king's enemies. And the cost of that deployment might be her life. So what do I do? She kept her voice level despite the fear climbing her spine. Refuse and prove I am expendable. Accept and walk into obvious trap. Those are not choices. Those are different methods of dying. You do what smart people do when backed into corners. Margot stood. You flip the board. You refuse to play the game by their rules. She moved toward the door, stopped, looked back. The ceremony is at sunset, but nothing says you have to wait for the king to dictate terms. Arrive early. Claim the space. Make them react to you instead of forcing you to react to them. That is insane, Kael's voice cut through. Walking into the throne room before the ceremony means no security, no preparation, maximum vulnerability. It also means maximum boldness. Margot smiled. It means showing the court that she is not a pawn waiting to be moved, but a player making moves. Fear and respect often look identical. Use that. She left. The door closed. Silence crashed back in. Evelina looked at Kael, found him already calculating, weighing the insane suggestion against tactical reality. She is right. His voice carried reluctant admission. Arriving early breaks their prepared responses. Forces improvisation. Chaos favors us more than them because we have less to lose. We have everything to lose. No. He met her eyes. You have already lost everything that mattered: family reputation, social standing, the future you were promised. What remains is just survival, and survival is easier to fight for than maintaining status. The words crystallized something she had been feeling but could not articulate. He was right. She had nothing left except forward momentum and the slim chance that burning everything down might let her build something new from the ashes. We go early then, her voice steadied. We claim the throne room. We make them come to us. Kale nodded, started adjusting their preparation timeline. You need different clothes, something that reads as warrior, not supplicant, something that says you belong in that space. I am Omega. Nothing I wear will make them see me as warrior. Then we make them see you as something else entirely, something they do not have category for. He moved to the storage chest, pulled out formal attire she had not seen before, military cut but elegant, deep crimson that would read as blood or power depending on lighting. Neither masculine nor feminine, but something deliberately ambiguous. Wear this, own the confusion it creates. She took the clothes, felt the weight of the fabric. Heavy, substantial, armor disguised as ceremony. This was it, the moment where she either ascended or died, where all the suffering and transformation and blood spilled in the last 72 hours either meant something or meant nothing. She dressed in the crimson attire, let Kyle secure weapons in places that would not be immediately visible, felt the weight of steel against her skin like promises she had made to herself about who she would become. When she looked in the small mirror, she barely recognized the reflection. The woman staring back looked dangerous, scarred, capable of violence. Everything the court said Omegas could never be. Good. Let them see this. Let them see what their betrayal and contempt had created. Ready. Kyle stood by the door, full formal armor now, sword visible. The message clear. This was military escort, official protection, not social courtesy. As I will ever be. They left the safe house, walked through streets already filling with nobles heading toward the palace for the ceremony. Whispers followed them, stares, people recognizing Evelina despite her transformed appearance, the Omega who refused to break, the woman who had stood on that platform, the revolutionary who had not meant to start revolution but would finish it anyway. Stories had momentum now, myth-building faster than reality. She was becoming symbol whether she wanted it or not. The palace gates stood open. Guards watched their approach with expressions caught between hostility and uncertainty. Kyle's presence kept them from interfering. His reputation bought passage when rank alone would have failed. They moved through familiar corridors, but everything felt different now. These were not spaces she visited as guest. These were battlefields. Every corner held potential ambush. Every shadow might conceal assassination. The throne room doors loomed ahead, closed, guarded by 6 soldiers in royal colors. The captain stepped forward. His hand stayed near his weapon. Lady Ashford, the ceremony begins at sunset. You are early. I am aware. Evelina kept walking. Did not slow, did not stop. I am claiming the space before it gets crowded. You will let me pass. Our orders are clear. No one enters before. Your orders are about to change. Kale's voice carried lethal promise. Because Lady Ashford has been granted provisional recognition by the king himself, which means she has standing. And if you prevent someone with standing from entering the throne room, you are committing insubordination. Do you want that mark on your record? The captain hesitated, looked at his men, looked back at Evelina and Kyle. The math was simple. Let them pass and maybe face minor reprimand later. Refuse and face immediate combat with the kingdom's most dangerous warrior. He made the smart choice. Stepped aside. Opened the doors. The guards obeyed. Heavy wood swung inward, revealing the vast empty throne room, columns rising to vaulted ceiling, the king's throne sitting empty on its dais, light streaming through high windows, painting everything in amber and shadow. Evelina walked in like she owned the space, spine straight, head high, every movement deliberate, claiming territory through presence alone. Kyle followed one pace behind, scanning, assessing, positioning himself to intercept any threat. She reached the center of the room, the exact spot where she had stood 3 nights ago during her platform speech, where she had chosen exposure over silence, where everything had changed. Now what? Her voice echoed in the empty space. Now we wait. Kael moved to position that gave him sight lines to all entrances, and we prepare for whatever walks through those doors. They did not have to wait long. Within minutes, nobles started arriving early for the same reason Margot had suggested, to claim space, to establish positioning, to see who else came early and what alliances were forming. Each arrival studied Evelina with calculation. Some nodded acknowledgement, others looked away like she was bad luck waiting to spread. All of them positioned themselves in the room based on whether they supported or opposed what she represented. The throne room was filling with implicit declarations, invisible battle lines being drawn through where people stood and who they stood near. Evelina recognized faces from her 6 years at court, nobles who had smiled at her during banquets, who had offered compliments that felt like assessments, who had treated her as decoration worth cultivating for potential future access. None of them looked at her that way now. Now they looked at her like threat, like explosive device waiting to detonate, like revolution given human form. Good. Let them fear what they could not control. More arrivals, military commanders, trade guild representatives, diplomats from allied territories, each one adding weight to the gathering, turning ceremony into something larger, more significant. This was not just about Evelina's petition. This was about the kingdom deciding what it would become, whether it would cling to tradition or transform into something unprecedented. The murmurs grew louder, speculation, gossip, theories about what the king would actually grant, whether Evelina would survive the ceremony, whether civil war started tonight or tomorrow. Then the energy shifted. Conversations died. Everyone turned toward the main entrance. Crown Prince Lucian walked in flanked by guards. Not arrested guards. Protective detail. He moved with the confidence of someone who believed he still had power, who thought this was temporary setback rather than fatal collapse. His eyes found Evelina across the throne room, locked onto her with hatred so pure it had weight. She met his gaze, did not look away, did not flinch. Let him see that she was not the woman he had dismissed as decorative and disposable. Let him see what his contempt had created. Lucien started walking toward her. The crowd parted. No one wanted to be between them when this confronted exploded. Kael shifted position, hand near sword, ready to intercept if Lucian made hostile move. But the Crown Prince stopped 10 feet away, just close enough to speak without shouting, just far enough to maintain illusion of civilized distance. You should have stayed broken. His voice carried venom. Should have accepted exile, should have disappeared quietly and let the kingdom move forward without you poisoning everything you touch. I poisoned nothing. Evelina kept her voice level. I simply exposed what was already rotting. You did that yourself when you chose corruption over duty. You destroyed me for what? Revenge? Ambition? Petty satisfaction? He laughed. Bitter. Broken. You are no revolutionary. You are just a jealous Omega who could not accept being replaced. If that is what you need to believe to sleep at night, keep telling yourself that story. She took one step closer. But we both know the truth. I uncovered treason, exposed conspiracy, saved the kingdom from being sold to foreign powers piece by piece. She smiled. It was not a kind smile. That I did it because you humiliated me does not make it less necessary. Sometimes personal vendettas and public good align perfectly. The words landed like blows. Lucien's face flushed with rage. His hand moved toward his belt, toward where weapon might be concealed. Kael's sword cleared its sheath immediately, the sound of steel on leather impossibly loud in the watching silence. Lucien froze, looked at Kael, saw death waiting if he continued that motion. His hand fell away from his belt, but the hatred in his eyes did not diminish. This is not over. His voice had gone quiet. Dangerous. You think you have won. You think standing here in your blood-colored costume makes you powerful, but the moment that ceremony concludes, you become legitimate target for every faction that wants to preserve order, and there are more of us than you can possibly survive. Then I guess I better make sure the ceremony never concludes. Evelina said it before thinking, before calculating. The words just emerged from wherever her instinct for survival lived. The crowd's murmur shifted. Confusion, speculation. What did that mean? She was not entirely sure herself. But sometimes survival meant improvisation, meant making threats you figured out later, meant projecting confidence you did not actually possess. Lucien's expression shifted, uncertainty cracking through the rage. "What are you—" The throne room doors burst open. Royal guards flooded in. Not the ceremonial kind. Combat veterans, moving with precision that suggested serious threat. And behind them, King Aldrich, leaning heavily on his staff, looking older than time itself, but moving with purpose that suggested this was not social courtesy. He was early. The ceremony was not supposed to start for another hour, but he had arrived now, changed the timeline, shifted all the careful positioning. Everyone dropped to formal acknowledgement, bowing, kneeling, the automatic response to crown entering space. Everyone except Evelina. She stayed standing, spine straight, meeting Aldrich's gaze as he moved slowly toward the throne. The king noticed. Of course he noticed. His expression revealed nothing, but she saw calculation in those old eyes, weighing, deciding if her lack of immediate deference was rebellion or strength. He reached the throne, did not sit, turned to face the assembled court with visible effort, every movement costing him, every breath a labor. When he spoke, his voice still carried authority despite the physical weakness. "We are here because Lady Evelina Ashford petitioned for something unprecedented. Recognition of autonomous capability for leadership, not through mating bond, not through traditional partnership, through demonstrated merit and political necessity." The formal words settled across the throne room, creating official framework, establishing parameters. Aldrich continued, "She exposed corruption that threatened our kingdom's security, uncovered conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of power, forced us to confront failures we had been avoiding." His gaze swept the crowd. Whatever personal motivations drove her actions, the result served our interests. That cannot be ignored. Murmurs spread. Half the room looked furious. The other half looked calculating. Everyone reassessing what they thought they knew. "Therefore," the king's voice cut through speculation, "we grant provisional recognition of Lady Ashford as autonomous candidate for a royal council position with full voting authority and independent operational capacity. Not Luna Queen, not throne, council position, significant but not revolutionary, power but not ultimate power." The room exploded. Outrage, support, shock, voices overlapping into chaos. Evelina felt the floor shift beneath her. This was not what she had asked for, not what she had fought for. This was compromise, partial victory, the king giving her something while withholding everything. She opened her mouth to object, to demand full recognition or nothing, to reject halfway measures. But Kael's hand found her elbow, squeezed hard enough to hurt. Warning, not now, accept what is offered, fight for more later. She swallowed the objection, forced herself to nod acknowledgement, played the political game even though every instinct screamed to burn it down. The king raised his hand. Silence fell gradually, reluctantly. However, he paused. Let the word hang. This recognition is conditional, dependent on Lady Ashford demonstrating capacity to navigate court politics without destabilizing the kingdom further. She will serve 6-month trial period, at the end of which we will evaluate permanent appointment. 6 months. Half a year to prove herself. Half a year of being legitimate target while having just enough power to be dangerous, but not enough to be protected. It was brilliant political maneuvering. Give her what she asked for in form, but not substance. Make her grateful for scraps while still vulnerable to elimination. And if she succeeded, Aldrich looked wise for elevating her. If she failed or died, he looked prudent for limiting her authority. She should have felt grateful, should have been relieved she survived with anything at all, should have accepted the victory and consolidated from there. Instead, she felt cold fury, because this was still control, still manipulation, still powerful men deciding how much power a woman could hold and calling it progressive when it was just different flavor of the same cage. But she had learned, had been taught by Margot and Kael and bloody experience that you took what you could get and then used it to take more later. That revolution happened incrementally when it could not happen immediately. So she bowed. Formal acknowledgement, accepting the compromise even as she planned how to expand it. The throne room watched her, waiting to see if she would object, waiting for explosion or gratitude or breakdown. She gave them none of it, just cool acceptance. The face of someone who knew this was not victory but understood it was survival. and survival was the foundation everything else built on. Aldrich nodded, satisfied. Then his expression shifted, went harder. Now, we addressed the matter of Crown Prince Lucien. The temperature in the room dropped. Everyone went rigid. This was the other shoe. The consequence everyone had been waiting for. Evidence of treason has been verified. The king's voice carried pain. The deep agony of parent forced to destroy child. Correspondence with foreign powers. Illegal sale of military intelligence. Conspiracy to undermine succession. He paused. Each breath visible effort. My son stands accused of crimes that warrant execution. Complete silence. The weight of those words crushing all other noise. Lucien's face had gone pale. He looked at his father, then at the guards surrounding him, then at the crowd that would not meet his eyes. Realization crashing through denial. This was not theater. This was actual judgment. However, Aldrich's voice cracked slightly. He is still my son. Therefore I offer alternative. Exile. Permanent. Stripped of all titles, all rights, all claims to succession. He will leave this kingdom tonight and never return. If he does, the execution order activates immediately. Mercy disguised as cruelty, sending Lucien away to live with his failure. With knowledge he had destroyed everything through his own arrogance. Some people would prefer execution. At least that ended quickly. Lucien seemed to realize this. His expression shifted through shock to rage, to something that might have been despair if he were capable of that emotion. You cannot. His voice broke. Father, you cannot do this. Everything I did was for yourself. Aldrich cut him off. You sold our kingdom's security for personal gain and political leverage. You betrayed every oath you swore. He raised one shaking hand. Guards, escort the former prince to his quarters. He has 1 hour to gather essential belongings. Then he leaves. Immediately. No delays. Guards moved forward. Lucien backed away, hand moving toward weapon again. This time Kael did not stop him. Let him draw the blade. Let him make the mistake that would turn exile into execution. But Lucien was not quite that stupid. He looked at the guards, at Kael, at his father on the throne, at Evelina standing there having survived everything he had thrown at her. His hand fell away from the weapon. His shoulders sagged. Whatever fight remained drained out of him in that moment of clarity. He was beaten, completely, utterly, irreversibly. The guards took him. He did not resist, just let himself be led away like prisoner instead of prince. The crowd parted. No one wanted to be associated with him now, with failure, with treason, with the fallen. The throne room doors closed behind him, and Crown Prince Lucien Valemont disappeared from history except as cautionary tale about ambition without wisdom. Aldrich sagged slightly, aged visibly, the cost of that judgment written across his face. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above whisper. This matter is concluded. The ceremony tomorrow will formalize Lady Ashford's council position. Until then, everyone disperse. Leave us. The crowd obeyed, moving slowly, reluctantly, still processing everything that had just happened, still calculating what this meant for their own positions and alliances. Within minutes, the throne room had emptied, leaving only Evelina, Kael, the king, and a handful of personal guards standing silent watch. Aldrich looked at her, really looked, studying her the way he might study strategic map before decisive battle. You handled that well, he said it quietly. Did not break. Did not object when I gave you less than you demanded. That shows discipline. Or it shows I am learning to take what I can get and fight for more later. She kept her voice respectful, but not submissive. The king smiled, thin, tired. Yes, that too. He shifted his weight, obvious pain. You understand why I could not give you everything, why the full throne is not possible yet, because the kingdom is not ready, because tradition holds too much weight, because I am still Omega and that still matters to too many people. All of that. He nodded. Also because you are still learning, still developing capacity for this kind of power. 6 months will tell us if you can truly hold it or if you simply got lucky once. And if I prove I can hold it, what then? Then we discuss expansion. Greater authority. Permanent position. He paused. Perhaps even Luna Queen. Not through mating bond, Through demonstrated capability alone, he met her eyes. That would be genuinely revolutionary. Worth doing if you can survive long enough to earn it. The words created possibility. Hope. Something to fight toward that was not just survival, but actual transformation of how power functioned. Evelina felt something shift in her chest. Not quite trust, but something like alliance. The recognition that Aldrich was using her, but also genuinely wanted to see if she could succeed. That his manipulation served larger purpose that might align with her own goals. She could work with that. Had to work with that. I will earn it. Her voice carried certainty. Whatever it takes. However long it takes. I believe you might. Aldrich stood with visible effort. Guards moved to support him. He waved them off irritably. Managed 2 steps toward the exit before he had to accept their help. Tomorrow then. Formal ceremony. Full court. You will be presented as new council member with all appropriate authority. He left. Slow procession of dying king making his way back to private quarters where he could stop pretending strength. The doors closed, leaving Evelina and Kael alone in the vast, empty throne room. She felt exhaustion crash through her. 3 days of sustained crisis, 3 days of transformation and violence and political maneuvering. Her body was done. Her mind was done. Every part of her that was still human was screaming for rest. But she was not allowed rest. Not yet. Because tomorrow brought formal ceremony. Tomorrow brought new attacks from new enemies who would test her immediately to see if she broke under sustained pressure. You did it. Kael's voice carried something that might have been pride. Not what you wanted, but you survived. You have power now. Real power. I have target painted on my back and 6 months to prove I deserve to keep breathing. She laughed. Bitter, exhausted. That is not victory. That is delayed execution. It is opportunity. He moved to stand beside her, looked up at the empty throne. You have 6 months to build alliances, to demonstrate capability, to make yourself indispensable. That is more than most revolutionaries get. She wanted to argue, wanted to say this was not enough, that she deserved more after everything she had sacrificed. But she was learning that power came in pieces, that you built it incrementally, that demanding everything at once got you killed while accepting partial victories let you survive to fight another day. We should leave. Kael's hand found her elbow again, guiding. You need rest before tomorrow's ceremony. Need time to prepare for whatever fresh hell they throw at you. She let him guide her toward the exit. Let herself be led because making decisions required energy she no longer possessed. Her body was done. Her mind barely functioning. They walked through corridors that felt different now. She was not visitor anymore, not guest. She was council member with voting authority and independent operational capacity. Whatever that actually meant in practice. She would figure it out, had to figure it out, because 6 months from now she would either be dead or she would be Luna Queen ruling autonomously. No middle ground, no compromise positions. The revolution she started was not over, was barely beginning. But she had survived the first impossible phase, had gone from humiliated Omega to recognized power in less than a week. If she could do that, she could do anything. The safe house appeared ahead. Familiar. Secure. The only place in the entire kingdom where she could stop performing and just exist. Kael opened the door, checked interior, secured entrance, then turned to her with expression she had never seen before. Soft. Almost gentle. You should be proud. What you accomplished in 3 days should have been impossible, but you did it anyway. I had help. She met his eyes. I had you. You had yourself. I just kept you alive long enough to discover what you were capable of. He paused. That person was always there. You just needed reason to let her out. The words settled over her, true in ways that hurt. Because he was right. The woman who stood in this safe house was not new creation. Was just unfiltered version of what had always existed beneath courtly training and social expectations. She had not become someone else. She had just stopped pretending to be what everyone else wanted. And that revelation, that simple acknowledgement, felt more revolutionary than everything else combined. Tomorrow brought formal ceremony, new battles, fresh enemies, 6 months of proving she deserved power she had taken through blood and exposure and refusal to accept defeat. But tonight she was alive. Was recognized, had survived impossible odds through combination of luck and skill and the willingness to become whatever creature the moment required. She moved to the window, looked out at the city that would wake tomorrow to news of Crown Prince exiled and Omega elevated. Looked at streets where her story was already becoming legend faster than reality could catch up. The woman who refused to break, the revolutionary who demanded the impossible, the Omega who would be queen. Stories had power, and hers was just beginning. Behind her, Kael moved through familiar rituals, securing weapons, checking perimeters, maintaining vigilance even when exhaustion screamed for rest. He would protect her through tomorrow, through next 6 months, through whatever came after. And she would learn from him, would continue transforming into someone capable of holding power without being consumed by it, would prove that revolution was not single moment, but sustained commitment to becoming different despite every pressure to stay the same. The sun set. Darkness fell. Another day survived. Tomorrow would bring light and ceremony and the next phase of war disguised as politics. But tonight she had earned rest, had earned moment of peace before storm resumed. Evelina closed her eyes, let exhaustion pull her under, trusted Kael to wake her if danger came, and dreamed of thrones and blood and the terrifying, exhilarating weight of power finally within reach. The morning of the formal ceremony arrived wrapped in winter mist. Evelina woke before dawn to find Kael already awake, standing at the window like he had been keeping watch all night. Probably had been. Sleep was something he rationed like a precious resource that might run out if used too freely. She sat up slowly. Her body protested every movement. 3 days of sustained crisis had carved exhaustion into her bones deep enough that rest barely touched it. But today demanded performance. Today required her to stand before the entire court and accept power while looking like someone who deserved to hold it. The woman who had walked into Lucian's study 4 days ago would have been terrified, would have spent the morning rehearsing every word and gesture until it felt more like theater than truth, would have tried to become what everyone expected rather than simply existing as herself. That woman was gone, buried somewhere between the platform speech and Seraphine's death. What remained understood something fundamental about power that no amount of courtly training had taught her, that the moment you stopped performing and started simply being, you became infinitely more dangerous because people could no longer predict you based on social scripts and expected behaviors. She had spent 6 years learning to be predictable, learning to fit into boxes labeled Omega and future Luna Queen and decorative political asset, learning to suffocate her actual self beneath layers of appropriate response. And in 4 days she had burned all of that away, had discovered that the most revolutionary act was not demanding power through clever argument, but simply refusing to accept powerlessness as inevitable condition. The realization settled over her like acceptance of burden she would carry forever. This was what transformation actually felt like. Not dramatic single moment, but gradual accumulation of choices that added up to becoming someone unrecognizable to your former self. You are thinking too much again. Kael's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. His eyes stayed fixed on the street below, watching, always watching, just trying to prepare mentally for whatever fresh nightmare today brings. You cannot prepare for chaos. You can only commit to surviving it. He finally turned away from the window, met her eyes. The ceremony is at noon. We have 6 hours to eat, arm you properly, and get you into that throne room alive. The casual acknowledgement that assassination remained likely even during official ceremony should have terrified her. Instead, it felt almost mundane, just another variable to account for in the ongoing calculus of survival. They prepared in silence. Kael had already laid out formal attire. Not the crimson from yesterday, but something darker. Midnight blue that was almost black. The color of deep water or storm clouds, elegant but severe. The clothing of someone who had earned respect through blood rather than birthright. She dressed slowly. Let Kael secure weapons in places that would pass cursory inspection, but remained accessible if violence erupted. 3 blades total, plus the poison antidotes he insisted she carry despite her objection that dying from poison was probably preferable to whatever torture enemies might devise if they captured her alive. His response to that had been blunt. You do not get to choose noble death over ugly survival. You committed to this path. That means fighting dirty and living with consequences. No martyrdom, no giving up because continuing is too hard. The words had stung because they were true. She had started this revolution, had demanded recognition and power and transformation of how the kingdom functioned. She did not get to quit halfway through just because the cost was higher than anticipated. When she looked in the mirror, she saw someone who could have been warrior or politician or something entirely new. The ambiguity was intentional, strategic. Let them wonder what category she fit into. Let the confusion create space for her to define herself rather than letting them define her. Ready. Kale moved to the door. We leave early again. Claim the space, control the narrative, like yesterday. Exactly like yesterday. It worked once, might work twice. He paused. Also, Margot sent word overnight. There will be attempt on your life today. She does not know specifics, just that several factions coordinated something for during or immediately after ceremony. Of course they did. Evelina felt cold acceptance rather than fear. Because today makes me official. Makes me legitimate target instead of just chaos element. Precisely. Which means we assume everyone in that throne room wants you dead and plan accordingly. He opened the door, checked the corridor. Clear. We move fast. No stops. Straight to the palace. They left the safe house knowing they might not return, that this could be the last morning, the last walk through familiar streets, the last moments before everything either succeeded catastrophically or failed permanently. The city was already awake, already buzzing with news of yesterday's throne room drama. Lucian exiled, Evelina elevated, the kingdom transforming faster than tradition could absorb. People gathered in small clusters discussing what it meant, whether this was progress or collapse, whether an omega on the royal council was inspiration or abomination. She heard fragments as they passed, some supportive, most skeptical, all of them watching her like she was phenomenon to be studied rather than person to be understood. That was fine. She did not need understanding. She needed fear and respect and the space those emotions created around her. Understanding could come later if she survived long enough for it to matter. The palace loomed ahead, white stone catching early light, banners snapping in cold wind. The seat of power that had seemed untouchable 4 days ago, that had felt like fortress designed to keep people like her firmly outside looking in. Now she walked toward it like she belonged, like those gates existed to admit her rather than exclude her. The shift in perspective was so complete she barely recognized her former self, the woman who had been grateful just to be allowed inside, who had treated access as gift rather than right. Guards at the entrance recognized her, stepped aside without being asked. The change was subtle but significant. Yesterday, they had hesitated, questioned, required Kael's intervention. Today they simply moved, acknowledged her standing through action rather than words. Small victory. But victories accumulated, each one building foundation for the next until the impossible became merely difficult, and the difficult became routine. They moved through corridors filling with early arrivals, nobles positioning themselves, calculating optimal placement for whatever happened next. She recognized faces from yesterday, from the platform speech, from 6 years of banquets and ceremonies and carefully choreographed social performances. None of them looked at her the same way anymore. The dismissive politeness was gone, replaced by wariness, calculation, the expression people wore when facing something dangerous that had not yet decided whether to attack. Good. Let them be uncertain. Let them wonder what she would do next. Unpredictability was armor when you lacked traditional forms of protection. The throne room doors stood open, guards posted but not blocking entrance, the space already half full despite the ceremony not starting for another hour. Everyone wanted position, wanted sight lines, wanted to witness whatever happened next so they could later claim they had been there when history turned. Evelina walked to the center, the same spot as yesterday, the same spot as the platform speech, claiming territory through repetition, through establishing pattern that said this space belonged to her as much as anyone else. Conversations died as people noticed her, the ripple effect of silence spreading through the throne room like dropped stone creating expanding rings in still water. She stood there, spine straight, head high, meeting eyes of anyone bold enough to look directly at her, refusing to perform submission or gratitude or anything except calm certainty that she had earned her presence here. Kael positioned himself nearby, not hovering, but present. The message clear. She had protection, had backing, had someone willing to kill for her survival if necessary. More arrivals. The throne room filled steadily. Military commanders, trade representatives, diplomatic envoys. The full apparatus of kingdom power gathering to witness Omega breaking centuries of precedent just by existing in this space with official recognition. She caught glimpses of faces she knew. Lord Blackthorn looking older, diminished. His daughter dead and his political protection evaporated. He would not survive much longer. Men like him did not recover from this kind of fall. They either died quickly or lingered in obscurity until everyone forgot they had once mattered. Other nobles kept distance from him. The social mathematics were brutal and immediate. Association with failure was contagious. Better to abandon sinking ships before they pulled you under. Evelina understood that calculus now, understood how quickly loyalty evaporated when it no longer served self-interest, how alliances shifted based on who held power in any given moment, how yesterday's certainties became today's liabilities. This was the world she had demanded entry to. Not the glamorous version portrayed in ballrooms, but the ugly machinery beneath, where people were resources to be deployed and relationships were transactions and sentiment was weakness that got you killed. She had known this intellectually, had observed it for 6 years, but understanding it viscerally was different, was the difference between reading about fire and having your hand in the flame. Movement near the main entrance drew her attention, the king's guard forming up, preparing for royal entrance. The ceremony was about to begin. Her heart rate increased despite her best efforts at calm. This was it, the moment where everything she had fought for became official or was taken away, where she either ascended or was eliminated. No middle ground, no partial victories beyond what she had already secured. The herald's voice rang out, "All rise for His Majesty King Aldrich Valamont." The throne room stood as one, hundreds of people moving in synchronized response to crown authority. The automatic obedience that had been cultivated over generations. Aldrich entered slowly, leaning heavily on his staff, guards flanking him, every movement visible effort. He was dying, everyone knew. The only question was whether he would last long enough to manage succession or whether chaos would consume the kingdom when he finally collapsed. He made his way to the throne, sat with relief that was too profound to hide. For a moment, he looked like nothing more than tired old man who had lived too long and seen too much. Then he straightened slightly, donned the mask of king, and the room held its breath. "We gather to formalize recognition granted yesterday," his voice carried despite physical weakness. "Lady Evelina Ashford has been granted provisional seat on Royal Council with full voting authority and independent operational capacity. This ceremony makes that recognition official." He paused. Let the words settle. Let everyone absorb what was happening. This is unprecedented. No Omega has held council position operating autonomously, but precedent exists to be challenged when circumstances demand it. His gaze swept the throne room. And circumstances do demand it. Lady Ashford has demonstrated capability through crisis, has proven she possesses qualities necessary for leadership. Therefore, we proceed. A chancellor stepped forward carrying formal documents, the legal apparatus that would transform yesterday's announcement into binding reality. He approached Evelina with expression that suggested he was handling something potentially explosive. "Lady Ashford, do you accept the terms of provisional council membership as outlined? Do you swear to serve the kingdom's interests above personal ambition? Do you commit to 6-month evaluation period at the conclusion of which permanent status will be determined?" The words were trap disguised as formality. Any deviation from expected response would be seized upon as evidence she was unfit, that she was too emotional or too unstable or too whatever excuse they needed to revoke recognition. But she had learned, had been taught by blood and betrayal, that you took what was offered and fought for more later. That revolution happened incrementally when it could not happen immediately. "I accept the terms. I swear to serve the kingdom. I commit to evaluation period." Her voice carried across the silent throne room. Clear, steady. The voice of someone who understood exactly what she was agreeing to and accepted the burden anyway. The chancellor produced a formal scroll, ornate calligraphy detailing her new position and authority. He held it out. She took it. The weight of parchment and ink somehow heavier than it should have been. "Then it is done." Aldrich's voice held finality. "Lady Evelina Ashford is hereby recognized as Royal Council member with all attendant rights and responsibilities. He looked directly at her. May you serve with wisdom and strength. May you honor the trust placed in you. May you prove worthy of the unprecedented recognition you have been granted. The words were both blessing and warning. She heard what was unspoken. Succeed, and you transform the kingdom. Fail, and you destroy not just yourself but any future Omega who might aspire to similar recognition. She bowed. Formal acknowledgement. Thank you, Your Majesty. I will not waste this opportunity. See that you do not. He leaned back in the throne, looking exhausted. This ceremony is concluded. Lady Ashford will assume her duties immediately. First council session convenes tomorrow at dawn. The throne room remained silent, waiting, everyone sensing there was more, that something had not yet happened. And then it did. An arrow materialized in the pillar beside Evelina's head, the shaft still vibrating from impact, wood splintering where the point had buried itself deep. Time fractured, slowed. Evelina's mind processed the impossibility. Someone had fired inside the throne room. During official ceremony, with the king present, with hundreds of witnesses, either the boldest assassination attempt in history or something else entirely. Kale moved before conscious thought, his body covering hers, sword already drawn, scanning for the archer, finding nothing. The crowd had erupted into chaos, people scattering, guards converging, shouting overlapping into meaningless noise. But no second arrow came. No follow-up attack, just the single shot embedded in the pillar. Evelina pulled free from Kael's protective grip, looked at the arrow more closely, saw something attached to the shaft. A message, wrapped tightly and bound with cord. She pulled it free, unfolded the paper with hands that wanted to shake but refused, read the words written in elegant script. Congratulations on your elevation. Now the real game begins. Survive 6 months and we might let you keep breathing. Fail and you will wish Seraphine had succeeded. Signed with symbols she did not recognize. Some faction declaring themselves. Some group of enemies making their presence known. She looked at Kael, found him already scanning the throne room, searching for whoever had delivered the message. But the archer was gone, had vanished into chaos, had made their point and disappeared. Show me. His voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. She handed him the message, watched his expression darken as he read. When he looked up, his eyes carried grim recognition. You know who sent this. I know the symbol. Faction of old nobility. The ones who lost power when Aldrich centralized authority 30 years ago. They have been waiting for opportunity to reclaim influence. He folded the message. Stored it. Your elevation gives them that opportunity. They can either support you as weapon against current power structure or eliminate you as threat to their restoration plans. So I am target for everyone. Old guard who wants traditional power restored. New guard who sees me as chaos element. Lucien's supporters who want revenge. Foreign powers who see weakness during transition. Essentially, yes. Kael's tone suggested this was exactly what he had expected. Welcome to having power. Everyone wants to use you or kill you, sometimes both simultaneously. The throne room was slowly returning to order, guards searching for the archer, finding nothing. The king still on his throne, looking older and more exhausted. This kind of brazen attack during official ceremony was itself message, that his authority was slipping, that people no longer feared consequences enough to restrain themselves. The kingdom was fraying, coming apart at edges that had held for decades. And Evelina had just become central figure in whether it held together or collapsed entirely. She looked at the arrow still embedded in the pillar, inches from where her head had been, close enough to kill if that had been the intention. But it was not. This was warning shot. This was declaration that games were beginning and she was primary piece on the board. The exhaustion that had been lurking at edges of her consciousness threatened to overwhelm. 4 days. 4 days since everything shattered. 4 days of sustained crisis and transformation and violence. And now 6 months more. 6 months of this. 6 months of constant threat and political maneuvering and learning how to hold power without being consumed by it. She wanted to collapse, wanted to give up, wanted to return to some version of life where she was not constantly calculating who wanted her dead and how to survive until tomorrow. But that life was gone. Had never really existed except as performance she had believed was real. The truth was she had always been trapped, had always been pawn moved by others. The only difference now was she had some ability to move herself, to choose her own direction, even if she could not control all the pieces trying to destroy her. And that was worth fighting for, worth surviving for, worth becoming whatever creature this kingdom needed if it meant having actual agency, instead of illusion of safety purchased through submission. Kael's hand found her elbow, steadying. We need to leave, now, before whoever sent that message decides the warning was insufficient. She nodded. Let him guide her toward the exit. The crowd parted, everyone watching, calculating, deciding where they stood on the question of her survival. She held her head high, refused to show fear or uncertainty, walked out of that throne room like she owned every space she passed through, like assassination attempts were minor inconveniences rather than existential threats. Fake confidence was still confidence if you performed it well enough that people believed it. They made it back to the safe house without incident. Kael secured the entrance with extra deadbolts this time, checked every corner twice, then positioned himself where he could see both the door and the window simultaneously. That was message. Evelina sat heavily in the closest chair. That was declaration of war. That was invitation to game. Kael's voice stayed level. They want to see if you are smart enough to play, strong enough to survive, ruthless enough to win. And if I am not, then you die and they find someone else to use as weapon against current power structure. He finally looked at her directly. But I do not think you're going to die. I think you are going to learn how to play their games better than they do. And in 6 months, they're going to regret giving you this opportunity. The confidence in his voice should have felt reassuring. Instead, it felt like weight, like expectation she might not be able to fulfill, like he was betting everything on her capacity to transform fast enough to survive. What if I cannot? The words escaped before she could stop them. What if I am not smart enough or strong enough or ruthless enough? What if I got lucky once and that luck runs out? Then we adapt. Kael moved away from his surveillance position, sat across from her. You keep asking, what if you fail? Stop. Failure is not option, not because you are somehow guaranteed to succeed, but because the alternative to success is death. So you find ways to succeed, you learn, you adapt, you become whatever this moment requires, even if that means becoming monster. Especially if that means becoming monster. His eyes held something that might have been sympathy. Power requires monstrousness. The question is whether you can be monstrous in service of something larger than yourself, or whether the monstrousness consumes you entirely. How do you know the difference? You do not. Not until much later when you look back and see the trail of bodies and have to decide if the cost was worth it. He leaned forward. But here is what I have learned in 15 years of being weapon for crown. Every monster was once person who thought they were hero. And every hero was person who did monstrous things and found ways to justify it. The only difference is narrative. What story you tell about why the blood was necessary, that is bleak as hell. That is reality. He stood, moved back to his surveillance position. And reality is what we work with, not idealized versions, not what we wish things were, just what actually is and how we survive it. She absorbed this. Let the brutal honesty settle over her. This was what her life was now, this grinding calculation of how to survive in a world that wanted her dead. This constant assessment of threats and allies and the shifting landscape of power. 6 months. She had 6 months to prove she deserved permanent recognition. 6 months to transform herself from chaos element into legitimate power. 6 months to learn how to be monster without losing whatever humanity still lived beneath the survival mechanisms. The task felt impossible. But impossible was what she specialized in now, had proven it by surviving the last 4 days, by standing on that platform and refusing to break, by looking at her own destruction and choosing to weaponize it instead. She could do this, had to do this, because the alternative was accepting that everything she had suffered and everything she had sacrificed and everyone she had become meant nothing. And that was truly unacceptable. The afternoon wore on. Kael maintained vigilance. Evelina tried to rest but could not. Her mind kept spinning through scenarios, through threats and possible responses, through the chess game that had just begun. Evening brought another visitor, Margot again, this time looking genuinely concerned rather than clinically detached. You received the message. Not a question. Statement of fact. The arrow. Yes. Evelina studied the older woman's face. You know who sent it. I know several factions who might have. The specifics are less important than the principle. They are testing you, seeing if you panic, if you run, if you collapse under pressure. Margot settled into a chair. Your response in the next 72 hours will determine how the next 6 months unfold.